are live with Game 3 of the 2018 World Chess Championship. International Master Danny Wrench alongside the one and only Grandmaster Robert Hess.
C7 is a very rare move in this position.
Yeah, so how often has it been played? You've been doing your
only
research.
Only a couple dozen times.
Okay, so at this level, that's
what you're
huge.
saying.
Yeah,
we have an NFL player getting his PhD in math at MIT, and we have
not a big deal.
women's world champion.
A lot of people get their PhD in advanced mathematical theory from the world's most prestigious technological institute. No, not a dubious position here for White, but I believe I hear the legend. Their feted master Mike Klein.
You heard a Grandmaster sneeze is what you heard.
I heard a Grandmaster sneeze. Which Grandmaster?
Oh, you can probably guess. How many Grandmasters are in the press room?
Ian Rogers.
Shout out to Ian. Give him our love. Give him one of those hugs.
I will.
And then hold for just like a second too long where it gets awkward and say that was from Danny. What would you say as a retired professional of the highest level? What would be your advice on that? On how you stick with the plan versus balancing, changing when things aren't going well, whether you like it or not?
Yeah, I think the key point is always having a level of unbiasedness, that even though you came up with these plans, you came up with these ideas, that you need to really recognize the exact moment in which, okay, perhaps given what we've seen, this wasn't the best plan. Let's try something else.
When you start playing for a win, you're also sort of playing for a loss, because chess is a very objective game, and you're starting to throw in your subjectivity.
Right.
And I really think that this match has been going Magnus's way. Even though this is just 1-1 right now, this game is still going, very likely headed to 1.5, which means he will have an extra white for the remaining 9 rounds, of 5 whites to Fabiano's 4, which is, of course, an advantage in chess.
And it becomes a bigger advantage the better you get, right? White at the highest level is a bigger advantage than it is at average tournament play.
And I love this quote. Love it.
This is one of Magnus's most famous quotes that he didn't just make this year. One of the earlier quotes we had was something he said recently in the press conference. But this is a great one that just shows who Magnus Carlsen is inside. What makes this dude tick? Some people think that if their opponent plays a beautiful game, it's okay to lose. I don't. That's it. I don't, right? I've had mediocre years. I've had good years. This year has been the best by far. That is a quote that was made recently by Fabiano in the press conference, and of course it's true. This has been his best year by far, and of course he's hoping to cap it off, put the icing on the cake, if you will, and add to that year with a World Chess Championship.
You know what they're really trying to do, Danny?
What?
There are no draws allowed before move 30. So it is move 26.
Move 26 means it's against the rules to agree to a draw before move 30.
Yep. What about bishop takes e5 here? And bishop takes e5 is a very good question, because if you take this pawn e5, take back, and knight takes e5, you get 3 pawns for your sacrificed bishop. And that's a very interesting change.
Yeah, no matter where the king goes, you get your third pawn.
Right. You get that third pawn right off the bat. Now, position that can...
Oh, and he didn't go for it.
Oh. Oh.
Oh. Oh.
We all wanted to see it happen.
We all wanted that. Oh. Oh. That's disappointing.
Some questions for you. You've told us about your match experience, but you've very good experience playing both of these players. So what can you tell all of us about their styles and sort of how you feel when you've played both of them?
Well, yeah, I've played both of them, and although somehow my real results was not good, almost I think probably even a bit worse against Magnus. But if we are looking from the chances that occurred during my experience while playing against them, apparently I got more chances while playing against Fabiano.
Bishop d2 is played, I guess, to try to slow down g5, or what are your thoughts on plans here?
I work for white at some moment.
Okay.
It's a tricky decision, because after f4, if exchange back try to push g5 at certain moments, you might get a pass pawn.
Right, get this past h pawn.
Very careful about that. I assume he might calculate bishop c5 first, because if it looks equalizing, if let's say these dark square pawns could be defended well, and white can make some counterplay, whatever, on attacking e5 or create a pass pawn on the center, then he will go for it.
The draw has officially been agreed. There we go. So as we expected, knight takes f5 was played. f5 was played, and the draw was agreed for exactly the line that we just showed you, the king bringing itself into h1. Is a light square that the bishop is just a bystander to watch.
Yep.
You know? And Game 4 is underway. The 2018 World Chess Championship between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen, currently tied at 1.5 games apiece. No blood has been spilled just yet, but as Game 4, the first moves are being made. We're going to get to that in just a second. Everyone calm down. The opening usually goes a little bit slowly. Alongside me, Grandmaster Robert Hess. And we are here to cover the World Chess Championship. I don't know what else to say. Game 4 is beginning.
Yeah, Game 4 is underway. We see Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. And, well, it's 1.5, 1.5. Magnus gets his second white of the event. And, you know, with the white pieces, we'll see how he makes use of it. And he started out in this game, unlike previous games. We've seen some Sicilians. We've seen a Queen's Gambit decline. And,
yeah, we've had a couple of... well, we've had 2 Rossalimo Sicilians waiting for the live board to update here. We know that we have seen several moves. We're on move 6, and we've got a small delay in the relay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the questions we've had. Actually, one of the big questions we've had is, what is this chessboard in front of us that you always see when we go to this big wide shot? And this is actually the square off board, one of our sponsors for the event. If you don't know what the square off board is, it actually makes the moves of games automatically. Yeah, what you're seeing in front of you is not Wizard's chess, it's just Magic. And if you are interested in getting a square off board, you can see actually the Chess.com discount code. Go over to squareoffnow.com for 10% off during the World Chess Championship only. But we actually have the games being relayed in front of us automatically throughout the day at times, and at different times we reset it, but it's actually a really cool, fun thing, and maybe you'll see more of that today. But one of the things that people may have just noticed is Robin and I did some laundry, and we changed our shirts, and that's because today is a bit of a special day. We also, throughout the day, will be doing some big announcements and some I think they call them flash sales on Twitch, the cool kids do, but it's really all surrounding the start of the 2019 Pro Chess League season, which will be on January 8th. If you don't know what it is the only global online chess league that exists. Teams from all around the world compete. Teams actually just finished qualifying, so if you're wondering how chess could be a team sport, you're going to find out more information about that today. Some of the biggest names in the game, both from a content perspective, big personalities, as well as players, like International Master John Bartholomew, who will be one of our guests today. Of course, Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana plays for the St. Louis Archbishops, and none other than the world champion Magnus Carlsen has competed in both of the first 2 seasons of the league, and he will be competing again, already listed on the active roster for the Norway Gnomes. And there you have it. We're getting to the announcement right away. Today, only in our Streamlabs merch store is a limited edition. There are only 32 backpacks. That's because there's only 32 teams in the league. So if you're interested in one of those limited editions, they will not be for sale after today. We expect them all to go pretty fast. So those of you that are here first and actually find that to be pretty cool, there's only 32 of them, so go get yourself a limited edition backpack. All right, enough of the hype out of the way. Time for us to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, because we have liftoff in terms of original preparation on the board. Robert, in English.
Yeah, we see c4 played by Magnus in this one, and he's clearly trying to avoid that really annoying Petrov, right?
Yep.
That's Fabiano's bread and butter. After e4, he plays e5, knight f3, knight f6.
Yeah, I'll show that on the analysis board for those who don't speak Russian. This is the Petrov defense, also known as the Russian defense, and something that Fabiano Caruana is very well known for. But as you said, another game. We had d4 in game 2.
Yep.
The first time Magnus had the white pieces. Now in English, both avoiding the Petrov.
And I actually, we both predicted this would happen, that he would avoid the Petrov time and time again. And in the current game, we see it, as we see it develop, that it's very typical standard opening theory. It's typical standard.
Typical standard. There are typical
redundant
standards. Most people don't know what they are. But okay, go ahead.
This fianchetto, you can play e3 ideas instead of g3,
but
the bishop goes in the longest diagonal in the g2 square, and that way it controls more of the board. But e3, of course,
another theoretically popular move.
Exactly. So g3 played, and this gets the bishop on the long diagonal. And, okay, everything here is just mainline theory, so there's not too much to talk about in the early stage. And the players develop very naturally after castling and d3 and rook e8. So,
well, one of the things I think that is interesting to talk about here, Robert, is the fact that what this position is, with colors reversed, is essentially a Sicilian, right? This type of structure is seen very commonly. If you follow us along the analysis board, take a look at the live position to the left, and then follow what I set up here on the right side, meaning the analysis board, and you'll see that this particular structure, without being super accurate about the moves, kind of forgive that, although I guess that seems just fine in terms of theory. This type of position that can occur is exactly like what you have on the other side of the board, with the colors reversed in many ways. Now, one big difference, of course, is that this bishop coming to e3 on the white side of a Sicilian dragon to support the potential tactics on d4 is not necessarily something that black has had to play yet, as the move order is a little different. But as far as the pawn structure goes, it's basically a mirror image of each other. And what does that necessarily mean? Well, all that it means is if the tactics that occur in a Dragon Sicilian are sometimes tactical patterns that you have to be aware of in this type of position. Robert already highlighted the fact that the bishop on the long diagonal here and the potential tactical pressure here is something you always have to watch out for. And there we have our first limited edition Pro Chess League backpack being taken. And so we expect those things to go pretty fast. There are only 32 of them, and we've already announced the sale. So after rook to e8, at this point, black is usually, or white, I guess, is thinking, how do we want to deal with this? And what are some of the common themes of development here?
Yeah, actually, this is going from a game Wesley So versus Fabiano Caruana. Just to use a little bit of history. They played several months ago in Paris, I guess earlier this summer.
Yep.
And here, white, being Wesley So, in that game, played bishop to d2. And that's a very natural move, developing the piece, opening the C file.
And it looks even more like a Sicilian reversed. Yeah.
Right, and it opens the C file for the rook to go to C1, and note that there's a bishop on C5. So it is like a reverse Sicilian with reverse colors, where a bishop would go to C4 in those variations. Here the bishop's on C5. And that makes it interesting that Magnus is thinking here, because this is still in a game played, like I said, just earlier this year, earlier this summer. And so you had to be expecting Caruana, at least the possibility of him repeating this. And so Carlsen going into a think and probably just trying to figure out, do I want to repeat that exact line? And he does, bishop d2, and knight takes c3. So we're still in this game, Wesley So versus Caruana, and in that game it ended in a draw, but we're in rare territory. In fact, that is only one of a handful of games that have been played in this very line.
Interesting that both sides, despite it being rare, both sides surely know it, because rare or not, it was played by two of their two contemporary, right? Obviously, one of them, Fabiano Caruana, the other one, Wesley So, also a top 10 player in the world. So it'll be interesting to see who shows preparation first, right? So right now, knight takes c3 having been played by Fabiano Caruana means he's willing to repeat what he did against Wesley So. To note that Wesley actually took back on c3 with the bishop. Talk a little bit about why here you wouldn't take back with the pawn, despite basic fundamental principles saying take toward the center, increase my control over these potentially critical squares. Why is b takes c3 not something that wants to be played? I know the answer why, but I'm asking rhetorically. Go ahead.
Well, you can definitely go e4.
Yeah.
If you go e4, then you kind of ruin white's pawn structure if there's a capture. And so if you take on e4 now, and if rook takes e4, you do have to be very careful before doing something like this, because actually knight to d4 becomes an option. The bishop on g2, we've made many comments about that, but the bishop on g2 now stares at this rook on e4. So if this knight moves away, you see that there's a problem on this diagonal. So you got to keep that in mind before ever capturing on e4 with a piece, because a move like knight d4 can come into play, which is a bit dangerous. So e4 right away, perhaps not the best, but you know, it can be played at any moment to ruin white's pawn structure.
Yep. The line you're showing here is tactically, like you said, dangerous from the perspective that the knight moved with the discovery on the rook, and therefore there's going to be a double attack on c6. But overall, if you ignore that tactic, one of the main things Robert's highlighting is that it split all these pawns here, and so, yes, taking toward the center would have been a quick and easy decision if you were just thinking about pawn structure principles. We had so many questions about that yesterday and talked a lot about it. Thanks for the tweet from Chris Bird. I know you're probably watching out there, Chris. Shout out. But so that's a very, very simple reason why taking on c3 is not ideal, and of course Magnus knows that, repeats what Wesley So did with bishop takes c3, and Fabiano plays knight d4. So are we in original territory yet, or Fabiano still playing exactly? Yeah, we're still exactly what Caruana played against Wesley So here with the black pieces. So nobody's blinked yet, right? The staring contest is on. Have you ever done that? Right? How long can you stare? Staring contest?
Just do this.
Don't blink. These
not
lights
blinking.
are really burning my eyes. Oh, I blinked.
I did. I'm not going to for a while.
I'm an old man. You never blink. Anyway, so the staring contest is on, jokes aside, and that means that both sides saying that, okay, you're repeating something that someone played against me, but I don't think I did anything wrong in that game, at least not yet, so show me, right?
Right.
Show me the money.
And a logical move here is rook to c1, which is actually what was played in that game. And the point of rook c1 is, well, you have a semi-open file. We actually were discussing the concept of semi-open files a lot yesterday, and while the white rook on c1 has this open file to work with, whereas black, if you put a rook on c8, you don't get to operate with that same open line. So, you know, rook c1 makes a lot of sense, but black can always retreat the bishop to, say, b6, or you don't even actually...
And this would still be following our game.
It would be. And the rook has that nice semi-open file, but black can always go c6 to shut it down.
And c6 shuts two things down, right?
Yeah.
It shuts down both the rook, as Robert's highlighting, but also the bishop on this diagonal, which, while it's not an immediate threat, one of the most important things I think we talked about this in game one, and I'll repeat it here, is you always have to be developing your pieces not just for the current tactical nuances and the current pawn structure, but anticipating all the potential changes. So blunders happen when people neglect things like this and say, oh, well, it's not a threat now, so let me just develop my bishop and forget about it, and then you blunder, right? So c6 is a very useful and very common move here for black in this structure to deal with both those potential points of pressure. And looking at the board, we still do not have a decision by Magnus whether he's going to be repeating Wesley So with rook c1 or coming up with something new. So, okay, as we wait for that, give our first quick shout out here. As usual, these things start pretty fast and furious. So shout out to everybody with us. Almost 15,000 of you with us already. The wonderful, the lovely Chess Bay, all of our mods. We've already had some bits and some subs being gifted. Shout out to Jackie the Swede. Haven't said hi to you yet. Chess TV chat. A lot of people rolling around saying Magnus, National Master Randy296 says Magnus using a lot of time in a well-known position. And I don't know that it's fair to say a lot of time yet, Randy, but he's probably trying to recall preparation from the perspective of he obviously knows the Wesley So Fabiano game. Right. I think he was at the tournament.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
no, he wasn't at that one, but they look at all each other's games.
Okay, right. So he wasn't at that one, but yeah, so it's not that he's necessarily trying to like he's forgotten theory, maybe trying to double-check exactly what type of direction he wants to send this on. Right, we often talk about there's the X's and O's specifics of what you want to get, and then there's, you know, just kind of being like, hey, if I get this position, because they're preparing so many things, they don't know what their opponent's going to play from day to day.
Right.
So, but if I get this particular one, this is kind of the plan I wanted. This is the direction, the trajectory I wanted to send this game on. So,
and that's a very important thing to note, actually. That we don't know what these top players are going to play in any given game because they play so many different things. When players are less experienced or just starting out in chess, they learn one opening and try to learn it as best as possible.
That's all I did. That's all I still got is one opening.
But you know, when you're a top player like both Carlsen and Caruana, you know a billion openings. You probably know pretty much everything. And we had Sam Shanklin come on the first day being like, oh, I don't really know the Rossalimo, and then goes on and talks about every single possible plan in the position. So,
I think Sam at the time, knowing he was about to give analysis of two players such as Caruana and Carlsen, was going to say, I don't know the Rossalimo as compared to them.
Yes.
Right, but of course we had to remind Sam, you know 99% more about the Rossalimo than everybody else on the planet. So,
exactly. But it goes to show why Magnus would be thinking in a game that's already been played.
And we have liftoff. Originality, everybody take note. B4, our first, is it officially a novelty or just a deviation from So's approach? We're going to double check that right now so we can give you that information, but B4 is played. So and look how quickly Fabiano responds with bishop D6, which first sight relieves defense of the knight on D4 to the bat cave. Let's analyze this, because normally on B4 we would have bishop remaining on the A7 G1 diagonal, or I'll highlight B6 to F2 because it protects the knight, and it is the typical square for the bishop in this structure. But Fabiano not only faces a move for the first time that wasn't played against him by Wesley So, but immediately plays bishop to D6, saying, I'm not worried about my knight on D4. Robert, explain things.
Well, there's going to be a discovery there, right? So if knight takes D4, pawn takes D4, bishop takes D4, well, we got a pawn, and you can take on B4 or on G3, or you have to kind of choose where you're willing to capture.
Yeah, because if you go for this and we continue to play the Desperado game, in the end, black gets a pawn with check. So I'm not even sure this is good. I don't know, but it is fancy to show that in the end black will not be down a pawn because he does get this pawn with check. But I think you're probably right. I think it's a good point, just that likely B4 is the simple pawn to take.
Yeah.
And you unleash the discovery on the bishop there, and probably fine. But okay, just the fact that he played bishop D6 so quickly, knowing how Fabiano did with the black pieces in game 2, really showing he was maybe better prepared as black so far in this match than he has been as white, fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. And he played really well and ultimately surprised Magnus with this move 10, rook to D8, for those of you who missed game 2. Check out one of our many recaps of this game all over the web. But here, bishop D6 being played so quickly, that's what turns my head. And look at this. He's got 4 minutes more than that which he started with. So Fabiano, again, playing super fast here with the black pieces.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because this line with knight takes D4 I think is pretty critical from the white's perspective, because you can leave that knight on D4, but it's really annoying.
It's so annoying.
It's just taking up such good control of the center. And I guess we should try to discuss why bishop went to D6 in the first place rather than B6. Because bishop B6 looked so logical there rather than putting the bishop on D6, where it doesn't really do that much.
Well, I think one of the main points you just said is that bishop D6 is sort of saying, I know for sure that at some point you're taking this knight on D4 and opening the bishop, right? Because you can't stand how strong that pony is, right?
Right.
For very much longer. And that's typical in this structure, right? And this is also something you can see on the white side of more classical Sicilian dragons, where it's white putting a knight on D5 in a very similar transition, and what white's trying to do is open up the E file to take advantage of an E7 pawn. Well, I'm describing exactly what black's trying to do, regardless of the fact that a pawn might hang on D4. If this transition happens, that structure is known as a Marquel Hop structure, and suddenly these two pawns are weak, and the E2 pawn particularly is backward, because where is this bishop? It's on a different square than it might normally be in traditional structures. So, again, highlighting kind of the forest through the trees here, the tension that's surrounding this D4 square is critical for the direction of the middle game, because at some point, white's going to have to deal with that strong knight. And when they do, this rook is already poised for pressure, and that's just the overall part of black's strategic theme here.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself, for sure. And if you do take on D4, you really probably have to follow up by capturing the second time on D4. It's not a position where...
Right, so because of what you're saying, because of what I was just explaining, right? You wouldn't do that and go here and then want to play this.
Right, because bishop G4 comes out with the tempo.
Right.
You're not hanging your pawn on B7, which you would be in other variations, but now the pawn E2 is hanging with much more force. So you can't really develop your bishop easily in many lines, but with this bishop... now attacking the pawn E2, that would be nice. But if we do take twice on D4, right? Let's say we do go for this knight takes D4, pawn takes D4, bishop D4, and we said bishop takes G3. I think bishop takes G3 is the move. Because what you were saying before with bishop takes G7, taking on H2 with check, I think that black is okay once we just trade off these dark square bishops. White's pawn structure is a bit better because black has these isolated pawns on the king side, one on the H file, one on the F file, and the bishop on G2 looks very nice, but it needs to stay in the defense. Because white's king is actually, I would consider, more open than black's. Maybe queen h4 check was better to include.
Yeah, I was going to say intermezzo, perhaps. If nothing else, in the fact that at the end of this line, at least now you're threatening something.
Right, you're threatening a pawn, your bishop can come to h3, the rook comes to g8 very quickly, and you move your king away. That way you actually unleash a huge attack on the white king. So despite not having a pawn sheltering the black king, I would argue that it's the safer of the two kings.
And again, I would argue that Fabiano's showing excellent preparation with black. Not that line will occur, everyone, but it is still one thing that Magnus is certainly calculating right now, which means it proves your theory, right? Very often these guys are calculating a million lines in their head that never appear on the board for our entertainment, right? But it proves that bishop b6 works. I think it also proves your point that how irritating it would be to take here and then not take back because of the e2 pawn, which means Magnus has his first real think of the game, and once again, when Fabiano has the black pieces, he gets an edge on the clock. right now of nearly 16 minutes. We have a moment while Magnus is taking his first real think of the game to remind you that every single day here on the show we do a daily question, and today, obviously, we're wearing our Pro Chess League blue, our Pro Chess League polos. These polos feel real nice on our skin. In case you're wondering how Robert and I feel right now, we feel good. And unfortunately, those are not available for anyone but staff and hosts, but you can get involved with the daily question, and what is available is Diamond memberships. The best tweet who tells us who's going to win the 2019 Pro Chess League with some good reasoning behind it is going to take home a 3-month Diamond membership we've been giving away. And to remind you how you can get involved in the biggest event, really, of the year that happened. I mean, the Pro Chess League runs from January to April/May, right, Robert? It involves pretty much every one of the top players in the world, and what's really fun is a lot of the up-and-coming juniors, the stars of tomorrow, right? And, of course, you can follow the Pro Chess League on Twitch directly. We have shows directly there, on Twitter, and, of course, the official Pro Chess League website. We also have Facebook, and, of course, you see there's also a backpack giveaway going on right now. Only 32 of them. I think a few of them have already sold, so if you want to get involved, go ahead and do that. Who you think is going to win the 2019 Pro Chess League? Last year, by the way, the finals, which was held live in San Francisco, was won by the Armenia Eagles, who had only just qualified their way in. Every year, teams are relegated if they don't perform well, similar to European soccer/football leagues, right? If you don't perform well enough. So a team qualifies their way in and then takes home the top prize. I wonder if we're going to see a similar story this year.
Yeah, it's hard to say who's going to win. I don't even know the lineups. I don't think all the lineups are set in stone. Obviously, there are some top players who have committed to certain teams, and we'll wait until that was all official before we, I guess, start talking about it, or is it?
No, we already know Magnus Carlsen is committed to the Gnomes. I mean, we showed his image. Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So will be playing for the St. Louis Archbishop. So if you ask me, my early favorite, again, without having gone through the detailed list, I can't pick against a team that has 2 top 10 players on boards 1 and 2. No, Caruana and Wesley So.
For me, it's oftentimes who the lower boards are that really matters.
True.
Because if you have some upstarts, some youngsters who are underrated and playing well above their level, then it actually helps a team that can bring strong grandmasters in the top 2 boards, maybe not as high rated as Caruana and So, but can compete with them.
Yeah, and of course Magnus Carlsen's Gnome's always a fan favorite because people love Magnus, but people also love Fun Master Mike, especially at ChessKid.com. We love FIDE Master Mike Klein. His mature adult name at ChessMike on Twitter is Mike Klein, and he'll be joining us here. I believe we have him on the line. We don't have his face on the screen yet. Here he comes. That means he's ready. And Mike, it's game 4. It's Magnus's second opportunity with the first move, and it's your 4th opportunity to show us that amazing picture of yourself pointing directly at my soul. I feel like you're peering right into me. So what do you got for us, Mikey?
Well, the media room's getting pretty loud. Like, basically, you wanted me to, blow your mind with the secret of chess. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, pretty normal beginning to the round. I will say that Magnus did raise an eyebrow after Fabiano played d5. Just, a very small little, wasn't expecting that move, sort of a gesture.
Okay.
But they both seem to have found their form now. I did get some intel from the Norwegian media outlet VG that Rustam Kazimzadeh is in London. We were 99% sure he was, but he was spotted on the street today with Fabiano. He's a pro at seconding world champion challengers, so, no chance of an interview or anything like that. But and world champions, I'm being corrected as I speak. But, okay. So anyway, Rustam is here on site, although Ian Rogers has reported in the past that he's a very diligent worker and not likely to raise his head above his groundhog hole.
Okay. The Rustam is also, just so people know, he's also a former FIDE knockout world champion himself, right? There's debate about whether that makes him a world champion in the classical sense, usually not listed in that list of, 15, 16 world champions we've had. But
I don't even think Rustam considers himself world champion.
Exactly. It doesn't matter, but I thought that's where you were going when you said world champion, so I figured I'd say the thought that was in my head because I rarely hold back, right? Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about that. So I've got the analysis board back to that position you said where Magnus raised an eye. You said on the move for d5 was the move that, from your perspective, may have been a choice Magnus wasn't expecting.
Yeah. That was in the first 5 minutes of the round, and that's the only time that photographers are allowed in the room. And basically, as a photographer, you have to basically pick your side. You're only going to get good shots of either Magnus or Fabiano, depending on which angle you pick. And I just happened to have the Magnus angle today. And sure enough, after d5, he just raised his eyebrow really quickly, for that half second. I've yet to look at my photos to see if I got a still photo of it happening. But that was the first move where, at least visually, unless it was a fake tell, as poker players might call it, that was the first time where he was like, a little bit. I don't know. Surprise is not the right word. It's the fifth move of the game, but fourth move of the game. But yeah, a little bit taken aback.
Well, yesterday's press conference, both players kind of agreeing that Magnus was pushing toward the end. In fact, Fabiano even saying that he feels like maybe Magnus could have tortured him a little bit more than he did, right? Maybe didn't take the most torturous approach. Although I think both sides felt like, all right, with best play, probably Fabiano was drawing anyway, but maybe Magnus could have pushed it on. Now that that's happened twice, and Fabiano has essentially slipped away twice with the white pieces, any little bit of regrets coming into Magnus's body language or tone, or you still feel like, all right, disappointed or not about missing some chances, he still likes how he's played overall? What is your read into how the players look and feel and the energy they're giving off?
Yeah, Fabiano didn't seem too disappointed yesterday, even though he thought he was under more duress than Magnus thought Fabiano was. So it's a little bit confusing to me who has the psychological advantage over the 3 draws in the first 3 games. I think overall, Magnus can kind of think about this event so far as a little bit similar to 2016, where the breakthrough will come at some point. In fact, wasn't that loss in 2016 in Game 8 something where he overpressed or something like this? I'm having a hard time remembering the exact moves of the game. So I think Magnus has the bigger reason to feel satiated by these first 3 games. I mean, the only time where you could say he threw away a real chance was in Game 1. In Game 3, although he was trying to create this pass pawn on the H-file, he didn't think his endgame advantage was as big as Fabiano did. He probably just regrets taking on E4 and releasing some of the tension before move 40. But other than that, I don't think there's a big regret on his part. So I think Magnus, small plus. I do think it was interesting, though, in the press conference yesterday, that he seemed aware of this non-incident with the touch move even before reporters asked him about it, which I don't even know how that's possible, unless one of the NRK interviews before he came to the press conference revealed this idea. That's the only explanation I have. So I've never seen him do that before. He answered a question about this touch move thing, and then Fabiano was asked a different question, and then Magnus took it upon himself to come back and elaborate more about the touch move thing.
You think that's just out of respect for his opponent and really wanting there to be no controversy of the fact, like, look, I didn't touch a piece and then take it back because my opponent wasn't at the table. By the way, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, maybe we'll try to find an image of that later in the show, or you can just go follow at ChessMike on Twitter, take a look at the Carlsen Caruana hashtag and find it. There was a moment where Magnus looked to have touched a piece and then not moved it, but it was confirmed later by all parties that he did so clearly with the intention to adjust it. Just to be clear, there was no cheating involved in yesterday's Game 3, but that's interesting, Mike, that he went out of his way, and I'm wondering if maybe he just wanted to put Fabiano's team at ease that I wouldn't do that to you.
No, I don't think that was it. I think he was perturbed that even the accusation was mentioned.
Okay.
I think he was more, his equanimity was upset by him thinking, I can't believe you guys out there would think that in the front of tens of thousands of fans, 2 arbiters, and several cameras, that I would violate such an blatant rule of chess.
Right.
I think he was protecting his own shield, so to speak.
Right. Interesting stuff. A little bit of controversy coming out every day from London, and that's kind of fun. Of course, those who want to know all the details of what goes on throughout things on site in London and throughout the day that Robin and I don't get to here, like I said, follow Mike on Twitter or read our daily news reports coming to you the moments that the round is done. Mike Klein and Peter Dockers, who will be joining you soon as the India Tata Steel tournament is wrapping up. And I don't have any other questions, Robin, unless you do. We can let Mikey get back to the press room. I'm sure Ian wants to hang out.
Well, I guess the only question I have is, it sounds louder than usual in the press room. Is there more media there today, or is it just a louder audience that's been there the whole time?
Ian likes to party. So.
I'm seeing a few more media today than yesterday. I can't explain why. A couple of new faces today, but might just be a little more buzz in the room for whatever reason. There's not any rain today for the first time, so maybe that brought a few more people out. But just to close the book, I assume you guys have mentioned this morning, although I have not gotten a chance to tune into the show, about the controversy about the little Caruana video and his, his chess face file being shown on the screen. I am tapping my sources to try to get more information about that. So please do check out Twitter today and my news report tonight. If I do get any information from either the St. Louis Chess Club or from Team Caruana, you can find it on chess.com/news, because that was the big news report of the morning. And maybe that's why it's so loud in here. Norway is still going crazy over this fact that they may have gotten the secret crib sheet of Fabiano's before the round began.
Yeah, well, no, we hadn't gotten to it yet. It was on our list of things to mention, and there you have it. There's one of the tweets on the subject from a very good follow on Twitter showing some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, including what he references as a now-deleted video that apparently had a close-up of a chess-based file that was it misinformation by Team Caruana, or was it really preparation that maybe those producing the video weren't aware that they were maybe doing something detrimental to hurt the Americans' chances? We'll talk about that a little bit more later today. It hasn't been a main topic for us, but certainly everyone should follow Mike and the news reports to see what more comes about of that developing story. So, all right, Mike, this sounds like you got a day full of things to do ahead of you. So we'll let you get back to it, and we'll get back to the last few moves that have now happened.
Thanks, guys. Keep crushing it.
See you, Mike.
Oh, it was loud there.
It was very loud. Yeah. And there you go, some more information that apparently was captured in that video that is now deleted. I don't even know how people do that. It makes me afraid of everything I put on the web. You know, you delete it, you can never take it back. And so that's an interesting story that, of course, Team Caruana will have to be mindful of if indeed that was real information they let out, Robert. But let's get back to talking and analyzing this position here, because what I want to discuss is the fact that after we were touting that the bishop came to d6 and that white would be the one who had to make a decision here at some point, Magnus sort of says, I don't think so. He played rook b1, and then Fabiano, after a bit of a think, took on f3 rather than maintaining that game of chicken there. Were you surprised by that? I was expecting the move c6, because what I was imagining is a line similar to what we had talked about, where g3 could be played in the end. So, and if that's the case, from my perspective, I want to maintain this knight in such a strong square as long as possible because of everything we just talked about in the structural change to open up my rook. I don't want to have to take here, yet Fabiano did exactly that. And so tell me what you're seeing from the current strategy by Black.
What that tells me is that Black was intending to take on b4 and not on g3, because the rook on b1 protects the b4 square. So if we make that move c6, which is a very logical move, knight takes d4, pawn takes, bishop takes d4. Now bishop b4 is not possible. My rook there, and it protects the bishop on d4. Indeed. So if you take on g3 now, I could probably just go h takes g3. Okay. And then after queen d4, play b5. The inclusion of rook b1 and c6 actually helps white, because that rook opens up the b file. The pawn on b7 becomes a huge target with my bishop on the g2 on the large open diagonal.
Really interesting stuff there from the world champion. Rook b1, a dual-purpose move, right? Both defending the tactical nuances and preparing to do something that is normal in this minority attack structure. A minority attack is when you have 2 pawns versus 3 pawns, and very commonly a dangerous thing to do when you have a bishop on the long diagonal, because you're prying open space for this long-distance relationship to meet on b7, right? And that's a very important thing to think about in terms of how rooks and bishops can work together on the open board. So, brilliant point there, partner. I love that.
And,
okay.
I actually like White's position here. I'm sure that the engines probably say just about equal or slightly better for White, nothing major. But the reason I like White is if we look at the pawn structure here. Okay. White's pawn structure, I love the 5-on-4 on the king side. I do not like Black's 3-on-2 on the... The reason I say that is bishop on f3 is very strong, has a huge open diagonal. And when I look at positions with equal material, the first thing I start thinking about is whose pieces are actually better. I like my bishop on c3 more than I like the bishop on d6, and I most certainly like my bishop on f3 more than I like the bishop on c8. And you may say, why? Well, what is the bishop on f3 doing? Of course, it's attacking b7, but what else if Black plays the move c6 next? Well, White should start with a4. And after a4, you can play c6, but I'm immediately playing b5.
Why not? It's a minority attack we were just talking about.
Precisely. And after, if we start trading twice on b5 for Black, once that rook hits b5, now it's hitting b7, it's hitting e5. My queen can follow suit on the b file. And we talked about this yesterday, actually. Queen on b2 would be a really nice placement because you're hitting e5 and b7.
You know how I feel about batteries. Don't get me started. Double battery, double rainbow.
Yep.
Boom. Yep. No, seriously, it's a really important thing to understand about why minority attacks can be dangerous, because it's not that, I always joke with my students, not that 2 pawns can beat up 3 pawns, right? less pawns can't take him out. But by definition, if you have less pawns, you have open lines.
Yep.
Because by definition, that means there's an open file somewhere, usually open diagonals with it. And so aggressive play with those 2 pawns combined with those open and active pieces, as Robert's saying, is what leads to that kind of counterplay. I agree with you. I like White's position. I don't know that it's a massive edge. I expect that Black's goal should be to deal with these threats as best as possible and hopefully keep the balance from the perspective that Black's goal usually is to draw in these matches, right? So maybe the fact that the minors have come off a little bit will help him, but I agree with you. This initially looks like Magnus has achieved a very decent position, and I'm starting to question the bishop on d6 more than I was initially with that tactic. I kind of wish I had a more traditional setup that I get in these types of English defenses as Black. But all right, well, I think we're going to take our first break before we prepare for our next guest to join. International Master John Bartholomew has actually been holding it down already. He did a special rest day show on Sunday going over in detail games 1 and 2. But he's a well-known, world-renowned chess coach and commentator. Hosts his own streams at twitch.tv/John Bartholomew all the time. He's competing for the Minnesota Blizzard in the 2019 Pro Chess League season, and he will be with us coming up next. So don't go anywhere as the action from London. Robert Hess and I commentating on a remote location. We'll be back for Game 4 in just a few minutes. And we are back, reminding all of you not to sit on the sidelines as you enjoy coverage of the 2018 World Chess Championship. Let us know which team you think will win the 2019 Pro Chess League season. Use the hashtag ChessTV so we can follow you. And all right, let's get right back to it because just after, okay, sorry, quick shout out. Yes, we have also the PCL limited edition backpack and remind you of where you can get at the Pro Chess League anywhere on the interwebs. So go ahead and give those channels a follow. But like we said, let's get right back to it, Robert, because we already have the next couple moves that have been played, just as you predicted. White plays a4, Black plays c6, and any reason why we shouldn't expect the minority attack that you and I have been touting as White's kind of key idea in this position to happen.
Well, maybe you might just want to keep it in your back pocket because b5 is not going to be totally stopped anytime soon. For example, if you put the queen on d2, just place there, bishop d7 doesn't actually stop b5 because the pawn on b7 will be hanging if you take with the c pawn.
Yep.
So you can remove the back pawn from the situation as well.
Although, to be clear, something like this may not be the worst transition for Black, given that he's going to have to sit tight and be sort of tortured via this minority attack. So at least here, I've made a transition to what is, yes, an isolated b-pawn, but it's also very well protected.
It's definitely protected extremely well, as you said, for the time being, but it's not going anywhere. And because isolated, it eventually probably will just become a target, not as much an asset. It's very easy for White to blockade it by putting a bishop on b4, start trading pieces on that square, and then double rooks in the b file, or use the c file or the a. I mean, especially the a file. That's really what I see here. That bishop on g2 covers the very important a8 square, which means that the black rook is not going to get to take over that file.
Yep.
And it's just a slight advantage, nothing tremendous, but it's one of those lasting advantages because your opponent's left with an isolated pawn.
Right. So despite the knights being off the board, which obviously upsets any bullet chess fan, right? They love how tricky those knights can be.
Yep.
We're going to have an interesting day discussing the nuances of how rooks and bishops work well together, both in the middle game and the end game. It's probably going to lead to some instructive moments of us talking about how aggressive does Carlsen want to be in the transition, because if you get these 3 pawns traded for these 2, okay, you're obviously up a pawn. I'm not saying that's ever not going to be good, right? This pawn will be a healthy extra one. But depending on when and how that happens, the specific logistics, you may not have the most winning chances with pawns on one side of the board, because as everybody knows, the knight is typically the better minor piece to have when you're winning with an extra pawn on one side of the board, because of its ability to maneuver in and out and poke and prod at weaknesses. Bishops being stuck, whether it ends up being the light or the dark square bishop, don't offer you a ton of flexibility in terms of creating weaknesses, right? They're great at ganging up with a rook on an already existing target.
Yep.
But they're not necessarily great at creating weaknesses for themselves. And so these are just some of the things that Rob and I will probably be talking about today. So if you're somehow just joining us and you haven't been here right when we started, shame on you, but these are probably some of the instructive things that will be happening over the better part of the next several hours.
And in fact, it's something that we saw yesterday as well when Magnus Carlsen plays with knight e6 to g5 to push that pawn to h4 and then push his knight back.
And then right back, the prodding. Exactly.
You provoke
at the end
a weakness
of game 3.
that you can't do with the bishop, and we say this every day, the bishop stays on its own color.
Yep.
And that makes it difficult to, if you put your pawn on the other color, then you can't attack it. So you're very correct when you say the knight is better when it's one side of the board, because you can just maneuver from square to square and start attacking pawns in different colors.
Yep. Well, we're waiting now for Magnus to decide how aggressive he wants to be with this. I liked your move, queen to d2, because when this happens, then we maybe get our awesome battery where the queen can slide behind. Although I kind of like this idea of b5 right away. I feel like, why not do it now while black is still struggling to get developed?
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
I think sometimes it's worth staying calm and not releasing the tension. We saw that yesterday. This point we talked about the Carlsen game. Obviously the Carlsen game. But when he had he took on e4, and we thought that maybe he should have kept the pressure up instead of letting Fabiano out. And here b5 actually doesn't let black out so easily, because the pawn on b7 still will remain a clear target, and you're already threatening to win a pawn with pawn takes c6, and there's trouble for black, because if you play bishop d7, I'll gladly take on c6, and you're going to have to take with this b pawn and be left with 2 isolated pawn compared to just 1 for white. And so that's a bad transition for black, to be sure. And so instead of bishop d7, if you start trying to take and say, well, let me create an outside pass pawn for myself. This a pawn can advance pretty easily, but it also can be stopped even more easily with a move like queen to a4. Of course, you can't push the pawn now. At some point, bishop takes a5 will be in the air if I go b6, or bring my rook to a1, and both of these pawns I would consider big weaknesses rather than strengths. And on the flip side, the pawn on b5 is great for white. It's an asset that you can push to b6 to take up even more space in the position and solidify black's weaknesses.
Yeah, great point. And black always has to be careful when this a-pawn has been extended, because if you can't get an ideal setup where the pawn chains protect each other, which of course right now a move like that would just simply not be possible, that means that your pawn is in danger of becoming a target for the rest of the game and maybe losing it very quickly. So that's this idea you highlighted of trying to push the pawns by the minority attack is a great thing, because it shows why that's really not possible, right? Or at least very, very risky.
And if you're going to do that, you should do that with the c pawn rather than the a pawn.
Right.
Which
so
is
something takes like this.
Exactly. And in some ways it's counterintuitive, because you often want outside pass pawns, especially in endgames, but we're not in an endgame.
Right.
And the pawn on c5 leaves the rook, instead of the pawn being on the a-file, leaves the rook open on the a-file for black. But I'm still worried about black's position, because in order to protect c5, you might have to go b6.
Well, and I might even just play b6
exactly.
right now.
You're going to play. That's exactly what I was going to say, partner. That you just play b6 means that bishop on c8 has to stay at home to the pawn on b7. c5 is much more difficult to protect, and now white has great control over the light squares.
Yep. And this is the kind of thing that high-level chess is all about. Many of our viewers, I think, are really interested about this kind of stuff, because these are plans being developed and executed that your opponent may know the best move is coming, and it doesn't make a difference. Right? Your opponent will know exactly what you're doing, but because these pawns are pieces that can't return, There's no trickery, no tomfoolery at the highest levels of the game, right? You're developing plans that are about positional weaknesses, and I always told my students that you're getting to a higher level in chess when you stop developing plans that involve tactical tricks. Not to say if your opponent blunders a minor piece along the way, you don't take it, right? But the best plans are plans that you can develop with no trickery. There's no juking your opponent. They know exactly what you're trying to do, and it doesn't make a difference because they can't stop it.
Right.
And that's what pawn structure is all about. And this move is, I expect it to come sooner rather than later because I just like the idea of white getting pressure before black can coordinate. So I also like the idea, along with all of you, that we are going to be joined once again, not just by John Bartholomew, already mentioned that, but by the one and only Ho Yifan, former women's world champion, who really stole the show yesterday, Robert. I mean, she was amazing.
She was absolutely phenomenal. I think her insights on the psychology of playing a world championship match, you can't get that anywhere.
She's played several matches of this kind.
And you can't get it anywhere except from people who have been through it.
Yep.
Right? We can talk about what we perceive to be the psychology. She can talk from firsthand experience. And granted, every match is different, but it's really insightful commentary by her. And she has defeated Fabiano. She's played Magnus many times. And I found it particularly interesting that Yifan, the former women's world champion, when she was just 16, when she was discussing who she found more difficult to face,
right,
and she said Magnus.
Yep. And then she also stuck with us and delivered just some super high level analysis of those final moments where Magnus was kind of pushing, maybe let something slip a little bit, but overall just the insights and the psychology. So if you somehow missed it, the full replay, I believe, of Yifan's appearance with us is actually available on Twitch. It's available on YouTube, and I think we even went full Facebook. You very rarely upload a video that long to Facebook, but it was so awesome we decided to do it. So pretty excited that Yifan is probably going to become a regular part of our shows here for the rest of the month. So use that emote proudly. We saw some emote spams of Yifan there. All right. Well, we're waiting here for Magnus to play b5. What else is he thinking about then? Or what kind of counter blow is he considering as to a reason not to just go for it here, not just be fully aggressive?
I don't really see anything that black can do that would make me not want to play b5, but perhaps, again, he's just waiting to see what is black's next move. That's I guess, one of the questions. Like bishop h3 is certainly a move that comes to mind, and by playing the bishop to h3, you're, of course, going to attack this rook on h1, and it's just a safe square and a developing square that also gains you a tempo. Whether that tempo is important, I'm not so sure. So if I do play a move, say queen to c2 or queen to one of these type of moves that just kind of wait, and if you say, well, what's your next move, Fabiano? That's a good question. I'm not positive black has any really concrete follow-up that makes b5 impossible within the next few moves. I guess this bishop d7 thing that we're talking
and I guess
about.
that was my idea, was because, yes, you're right that this isn't my favorite thing to do, but from my perspective, I would take the opportunity to have to defend this position, especially if the queen was on c2. Now when I'm gaining this tempo, I might indeed be pushing that pawn faster than we originally thought, right? Just to get it to a safe square. And even if the queen's on d2, right? I mean, in some of these positions, that might be a possibility that I can take twice and then play b4, and perhaps moves like this.
Well, no, I'm taking on b4.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. First blunder of the day. We're we're 45 minutes in. Okay, somebody in Vegas just won money. When will Danny first have to be corrected by Robert for blundering?
Yeah,
I feel like my blunders are happening faster with each day.
Well, that was, of course, why queen d2 I felt was preferable to queen c2, just to keep the b4 square. But maybe rook b8 if we go back a few moves.
But you know what can be played though is this one.
And I told you I'm going to plant my bishop.
You're
on
still
b4.
going to do this, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I guess you're right. So this idea here, where the pawn gets sufficiently blockaded and then potentially strangled, is not my favorite version of this story I was telling. So you're right.
So maybe at the very start here, when I was asking what black's next move will be, rook b8 is it. Because if you put your rook on b8, then you're protecting the b7 square. Yes, white can still go b5 and probably will go b5, but now at least my rook's not on. I don't like my rook there either. I guess I don't even. Maybe bishop d7 still, and accept the fact
to get the
that
c pawn.
Go c5 for black. Same problem you suggested before. b6 is really annoying. Really beautiful bishop on f3 that can't really be challenged in any meaningful way.
Darn bishop. No, you're right, and I hope that this is interesting for people, because it shows that this kind of small advantage here is still a potentially, I don't want to say devastating one, but a really, really difficult one to deal with over time. when you're right now what black is calculating is variations with less evils.
Yeah.
Right. What's the least evil way for me to be submitting to that weakness on the queen side? Is it a version like Robert said, a version where you take on a weak c pawn? Right. Maybe it is. Right. Yeah. At least from the immediate relief perspective, you're not facing the kind of pressure you would when in the variations where we had rook and bishop hitting upon here. Right. So that's one potential thing. And again, the long-term drawing chances I give Fabiano in this position are based on some of the things we sort of foreshadowed. Is that if he can find the right way to get counterplay or the right set of pieces to trade off, it's not going to be just a game over if he loses the pawn, right? Meaning there's still drawing chances because of the 5-on-4 structure and white lacking a knight. But that doesn't mean you're happy about it, right? Because you're groveling.
And I would say actually the geometry of this position is better, and this is why I would prefer to have a C pawn rather than a B pawn. Again, it doesn't seem like the right mindset when the B pawn is farther away from the king side. It makes it harder in some ways.
You're talking about the geometry of the analysis board position.
The analysis board position. Because when I put my queen on C7, I very easily protect both pawns at the same time. When my pawn is on B7, where am I going to protect that pawn from?
Then your queen's exposed.
Exactly.
Right?
It's exposed
on
immediately.
the C file. Yeah.
So I think that just sort of how that position plays out is much more meaningful to have the pawn towards, I don't know, meaningful. It's not meaningful. It's just better to have the pawn on c6 because then the queen comes to c7. It protects both, and it's just much more easily a safe structure. And it takes a lot longer for white to start hitting that c pawn than I would think the b pawn.
Yep. Okay. Well, maybe this is the type of variation Fabiano is going to try to drive play toward, and maybe this is why Magnus has gone into his first really long think. He spent some time when Fabiano kind of surprised him. If you happen to be just joining us, back on the move b4, quick history of this game, was the first move that Magnus deviated from a previous game between Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana. Wesley So had played the move rook to c1. Magnus played the move b4. But then Fabiano quickly snapped off the move bishop d6. And that was really the first moment where Magnus went into a think, ultimately deciding not to do any sort of captures and dancing with the dangerous discoveries, and instead played the move rook to b1.
Right.
And those were the first few moments where we had some thoughts, and now we're getting another think here by Magnus as he decides how to move forward here.
And it's just interesting to me that black has moved more quickly in every single game. So in game 1 of the match, Magnus was black. He had a great position. He had more time. In game 2, Fabiano was in his preparation, equalized, and then got an advantage very easily, made a draw ahead on the clock.
Is that just a sign of modern-day preparation?
Yes.
Given that it is, right? It's just that it's easier to prove variations that lead to equality, or at least comfortable positions where black feels like they can draw in the long term, than it is to prepare a proven advantage.
Yeah, and because of this sort of mantra, win with white, draw with black,
right,
you feel much more pressure when you have the white pieces. And actually, you know, we've talked about this, that it is advantageous to have the white piece in the game. You move first, you dictate the action, but there's also more pressure on you to win those games. And so every game we see that white is thinking more and more because black seems to be equalizing and then some in a lot of these games, and it causes you to start trying to figure out, how do I actually get something that can lead to a win?
Funny picture there here as we wait for Magnus to make that decision from David Yada, who is a very, very well-known chess photographer, considered amongst the best, and actually has an amazing book called The Thinkers, but this is a funny one. Saying today I got trapped behind a mob again and couldn't get photos of the players, so I took photos of my friends and colleagues instead. This is Mike Klein. That's a great photo of Mike. I mean, it's weird looking, but that might just be Mike. No, I'm kidding. No, it's an artistic angle. I'm kidding, but that's a great photo. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, David Yada is an absolutely fantastic photographer,
Yep.
and The Thinkers is a great book, and everything I see from him on Facebook and all over Twitter, and just every single big chess event where he's an official.
He's always there when it matters.
Yes,
somehow.
Yep.
So, yep. Okay. Well, I'm surprised. I guess I just don't understand the straightforward approach not happening yet.
E5 is almost too logical.
Yeah, B5 is almost too logical, which makes me think we're not going to get it, and we're going to go back to your Queen D2 move. Another move I'll throw out there as an awkward way to do the same sort of thing is a move like Rook B2. With the idea of just really, you said white's not worried about black stopping B5, and part of the reason Robert said that, everybody, is not only can black not stop B5 immediately because of, okay, we have clear tactical reasons not to, but even if you got something to defend that, I'm just going to go with the line I was talking about, some kind of crazy. When you play something like this, probably this weakness here becomes much more of a problem than anything you were going to deal with on the B file. The C pawn, a newly created, self-created backward pawn, will be the story from here on out. And so, okay, this is a funny idea, but I was thinking I would flip the script here, and maybe I've got batteries here, batteries there, and everybody's happy. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of other candidate moves in this position. They all center around the ideas Rob and I have been highlighting. White wants this. Black is choosing the least evil way to take on a positional weakness that the minority attack always gives us. And that's what the players are thinking about right now.
Yeah, actually, it is a curious time for Magnus to spend so much of his remaining minutes, because I don't see like this position is that complicated. I think that's part of the problem, because he really wants to get a win. He really wants to press with the white pieces. You know, he did move first. He got to choose the opening, and instead he was shocked. It's as my client told us, he was surprised by how the opening went. The move d5 and move 4 surprised him, but b5 here is just the move. I
don't know either.
I'm reluctant to even suggest any other move, because I think that b5 is the move. It's the best move objectively. It gives white real chance and advantage. I'm not sure exactly why Magnus is thinking at this moment. Maybe he's thinking about the future of the position. And sometimes chess players do that, right? We think, okay, I'm not thinking about this move b5. I know I'm going to do that at some point.
Right.
But after b5 in this sequence of events, I'm just trying to foresee what I might follow that up with. And maybe he doesn't see an exact follow-up that gives him anything more than a symbolic edge.
Normally we would frown upon that approach, as Tal wrote in his book, the Tal Bodvinik autobiography. His theory was that even if you try to justify thinking a lot about the future, you may think you know, but you don't exactly know what your opponent's going to play. And if you take too much time, you put yourself in a position to have less time once you know what's on the board, right? So there's like the balance of that, right? You don't want to play too fast and let anything slip, and you want to choose the right plan, so take the time to do that. But I think Tal, the magician, always was an advocate of if there's a very straightforward move, you should play it and bring the pressure. I think that here it's hard to be critical of that, because I don't think time pressure is going to be something that decides this game, given that it's not a super complex position yet. I think White's plan is really straightforward. Diamond member Smell Fungus in the Chess TV chat just said the positions with knights are more interesting. And, it's kind of funny, because I think that's kind of a simple way to put it, but I will say that's why I'm saying I don't think time pressure is going to be an issue here, because it's not going to be super tricky down the stretch, right? It may be technical, right? There may be a really important coordination with the battery of bishops and rooks working together that either prove your edge or not as white, but it's not going to be a mess. Is that fair to say? Without the knights.
He went rook e1.
Wow. So there you go. So the answer is there was another move on his mind, and now this is a really deep move potentially, because he's saying, look, b5 isn't going anywhere. For whatever reason, I want to make sure this e2 pawn is protected down the road.
I really don't like that move.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. Member Ski King, I think Ski King, I'm not good with usernames, in the Chess TV chat now, asking if Magnus is trying to win the psychological edge with moves like this. I don't know. I don't like the move. I liked b5.
Yeah.
And I don't know what engines would say in front of us. I'm not a scientist. I'm nor a rocket scientist. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand not playing b5.
I'm trying to comprehend, and I think rook e1 was played to avoid bishop h3 with tempo. That's one idea that I have with.
Okay, that's interesting. So maybe variations Robert's highlighting down the road where black would otherwise be down in development, but Magnus doesn't like this bishop coming with tempo, and then maybe that coordinates more quickly than you normally would. But that seems really sort of deep and abstract to be worried about.
I'm just surprised. I'm not saying that b5 was a winning move or anything like that. Yeah. Of course not. But white is playing with the initiative on the queen's side. So when you play b5, you start trying to open up this side of the board. And after bishop d7, which seems like a reasonable response, if you go b5 now, we were talking about this. Firstly, you can take with the c pawn also. I mean, we didn't talk about this part enough. If I take with that pawn and go rook a7.
Tempo. And guarding the pawn.
And now you're going to lose your a4 pawn. So this is not something you want to do, right? So maybe you should take on b5 first. Here, but then after...
Now I can take with the
bishop. Exactly. Yeah. And you have this well-protected pawn a6. The bishop on b5 cannot be kicked from its square. You need a pawn to kick it from there. But I think black is doing absolutely fine in the position. Could even start to claim an advantage as that a pawn becomes a stronger pawn towards the endgame if the queens get traded like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say that white still doesn't have a small edge because there's weaknesses that are created, but okay, but that's not as big of an edge as anything we were talking about earlier, and these type of mysterious moves, like rook to e1, are things that remind us to shout out to our recap videos that are done on a daily basis by our hosts. Recap videos can be found on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook. Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky brings them to you on a daily basis, and he provides immediate insight. Of course, rest day recap shows take place on the rest day. John Bartholomew will be joining us today, and he'll certainly have plenty to talk about between these last two games, games 3 and 4. Levy Rosman taking the reins of those shows later on in the month. Yasser Sarawan bringing you daily recap videos at Chess.com. His insights are unique, and with lots of time to think about it, he definitely provides some interesting opinions on the players' approaches and psychology. But like I first started with, Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky, daily recap videos. Maybe he'll have more reasons to justify rook e1 than Robert and I can come up with right now, because as far as I'm concerned, mysterious rook moves, right?
It's either the deepest move possible and just playing for a sustained edge that I don't really see, but rook e1 is not a move that it wouldn't have been my, well, I didn't recommend it, so it wouldn't have been the first 4 moves that I thought about, which could make it a good move, honestly. But I just don't think he's playing with enough initiative, with enough momentum here, and he's slowing down. And Fabiano is clearly comfortable in a position like this. He played the black side of a similar position against Wesley So. Yes, Magnus deviated from that game earlier on in this one, and instead of getting anything that I think playing with kind of in the playing in the spirit of the position, just going forward with the minority attack, all minority attack over there on the queen side, he's playing slow moves like rook to e. I think he doesn't like his position as much as I do.
And maybe he doesn't like the fact that if he plays b5, as much as we're highlighting it as the clear and concrete thing white does, and it is the principled thing to do, Magnus wants to win, right? And remember, one of the things we talk a lot about Magnus's style is that he understands that in order to outplay the best players in the world, sometimes you have to risk a little bit, right? You got to give a little bit to get a little bit,
risk
right?
it to get the biscuit.
You risk it to get the biscuit, and just he spends. I don't want to say he spends moves like wasting time, but Magnus understands the need to maneuver. To outplay somebody, you have to create opportunities and things for them to think about. I mean, okay, we're being general, but he's known for doing this. I mean, this is what he does better than any player on the planet, is win positions he's not supposed to win. Right? And so maybe just the simple thing is like, look, I understand that b5 is a move that's coming. It's not going anywhere. But white still has an edge here. And if he sits on the position and prepares it slowly, you know, he has an opportunity at some point to be better anyway. Maybe he just wants to keep his options open. Right?
Maybe he's playing for d4.
Staying flexible. That's another crazy idea, right?
Not immediately, probably, because e4 is a responsive.
Right, let's just make some sort of move. d4 might be met by e4.
Also, the rook on b1 would be, that particular line would be hanging.
Would be
maybe,
a big problem,
maybe e4 for white. If you go bishop f5, I'll go e4, and then play d4, and I can play like this as well.
That's an interesting trade of ideas, going away from the minority attack, but maybe to do something more dynamic. And I think there's something to that. I think that Magnus is trying to avoid the most forced roads traveled, right? He wants to have this position on the board as long as possible, where white is just a teeny bit better, and see what Fabiano does.
I will say that black is a bit cramped. So even if you played bishop d7, you may stop b5 if everything holds well for black, but what's your next few moves? That's always an important thing to think about when you're playing a game, is the strategic aspect, not just a move-by-move basis, but what concepts you're going to come up with. What are you going to do? At any moment, white can also play a5 just to totally shut down the queen side and say, I'm going to play in the center with e4, d4, things like that.
Which is, it goes away from the minority attack, but it's saying, it's taking a different approach. You would do that if you really felt confident. You could change the center structure for an advantage of some kind. Right? Because the risk of a5 is now you've abandoned the idea of b5, and potentially in some endgames you're the one with more pawn weaknesses than black.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's an important point to show. If we just show that on the board, the reason why this isn't just a no-brainer, everyone, yes, it makes this b7 pawn backward, but now in a lot of positions you maybe have the more easily targetable pawn than black does. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would not play a5 anytime soon if I'm Magnus, but it is something that you can play. Just if you're going to go straight forward in the center and don't want to give black any sort of counterplay over there on the queen side, it is something you can keep in mind as an option. But yeah, rook e1, strange move to me. I think 3 strange is enough.
3 strangers is enough.
Yeah.
Mysterious rook moves. I believe there are books about that.
I almost said I've seen Stranger Things, and then the double entendre just like hit me.
Stranger Things. That's
I was like,
right.
oh,
Yep.
can't say that.
We've all seen Stranger Things, right? Shout out to 11. We love you.
Yep. Millie Bobby Brown.
Bobby Brown, yeah. I saw a really funny comment. I don't know why I have to read this. I think it was somebody, they call me Brian, said, but what does Ja Rule think? I don't know why I found that hilarious. That's Twitch chat for
Ja
you.
Rule, what is this?
What does Ja Rule? What does Ja Rule
What is this,
think? If we could get
2002?
Ashanti on the line, right? We might find out what Ja Rule thinks.
Oh, gosh.
All right. Well, we're waiting here a little bit. Just want to thank everybody who's gotten involved already to this point in the daily question. Shangdu Pandas had an advantage in the 2018 PCL final, narrowly drawing 2 boards. They're right. Whoever I got to see, Terrell Philadelphia makes a great point that the Pandas, I think, were many people's favorite to win last year's season. And look, he even went as far as to make an image that shows the Panda logo with 2019 PCL champions. So if this guy ends up being right and the Pandas end up taking it all, that might be worth like a lifetime Diamond membership. I don't know. I mean, that would be an amazing thing. So thanks for getting involved. Remember, you can use the hashtag ChessTV and answer our daily question. We got Pro Chess League polos on today.
Yep.
Because it's coming. The biggest league, the biggest team thing in chess. I would say just one of the, what has just kind of jumped on the scene is one of the most entertaining things that keeps us happy during those winter months, January to April, is coming in 2019. So get involved and let us know who you think is going to win. All right, we have liftoff. That's exciting. We have moves. We have moves. We also have a backpack, limited edition. Only 32 of these exist because there are 32 teams in the league. We've already sold like
A bunch of them.
a few of them today. So if you want one of those things, your time is running out. Click the merch store button either below the Twitch player or the Chess TV player and get one of those limited edition babies. All right. So rook e1, bishop d7. Okay, this is what we anticipated, and now we're saying like, look. Now black can take a number of ways on b5, and we're happier. This is why I was an advocate of playing b5 earlier while black was still underdeveloped. But okay,
Right.
we won't continue to remind us of the past. Instead, we see the position now with rook e1, bishop d7, and e3 by Magnus. Just again, a very flexible, not the most straightforward plan being played here. And I actually kind of like this. The more we're coming around to the fact that, yes, b5 was the strategic thing we had to focus on, Robert, because I think it's the most instructive thing for the members, too.
Yeah.
But now we're looking at a position where Magnus is keeping his options open. Is he going to play d4? Is he going to play b5? Is he going to play a5, right? It's like a running back right now. He's like, where are you going? He's juking you.
You calling the pawns the offensive line?
Offensive lineman, right? Give me a highway, and I'll hit that hole. I'll run through it. That's right.
It's actually an interesting thought because right now he's taking his time, and we both talked about b5. But if b5 led to a position where black, has good chances to hold, it's more forcing.
Yeah.
It gives your opponent fewer options to work with. In this case, it would be a good thing, because sometimes having too many options, that's when you start to go wrong. But when you have few good options and you're a 28-32 number 2 player in the world, you're going to find all of those good moves when there are only like 2 of them to find. But here, now it's like trying to come up with a concrete plan. So what I was saying before, black is a bit cramped relative to white.
Yep.
The bishop on f3 is much better than the bishop on d7. The bishop on c3, that's also better to me than the bishop on d6, because if d4 does happen, you're opening up that long diagonal for the bishop. But for now, the bishop on d6 is perfectly fine, protecting e5, attacking b4, but piece quality, very important here.
I agree, and I guess I'm saying, okay, but then what does it amount to, right? We had our knights on the board. We pop a pony on c4. Black might return the favor with one on d5. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I'm wondering how much of a story that's going to be here. If these bishops can really be that much better than their opponent's counterpart, that's something to prove an advantage. I mean, I guess I still look at this structure and say b5 is the most straightforward way for white to get a long-term edge, but I have a feeling Magnus is going to surprise us here with something different. I'm starting to think that maybe there's queen c2 and d4 coming, based on the fact that we wouldn't want to play d4 right away, I think, because of e4.
Right.
You agree?
I agree.
Right? So if queen c2 comes and we go for this plan that you highlighted with d4, we've prevented black from pushing anything to e4 now because we have double defense on that square. So, interesting stuff, and I guess we'll find out what Magnus has in store here.
Yeah, I think what you just said, moves like queen c2, so you can play d4 and not have to worry about e4, are very interesting. And okay, you don't want to allow black to close the center. The whole point of playing d4 is to break open that bishop on c3. And
Right.
as you mentioned, if you go d4 and black goes e4, your bishop on...
Right, you're closed.
Yeah, it's
Right.
closed down. It's not something that you want to see happen.
And maybe that's a decision that Fabiano is thinking about here because of that. I kind of like the move queen e7. I'm predicting that as Fabiano's move, both from the perspective that it completes development, hashtag basic principles, creates a battery over here, which may or may not be relevant if white doesn't go for a traditional plan. We want to keep our eye on that. And I'm preemptively saying, look, there is no d4 coming if I can play e4, right? And now, maybe one of the drawbacks of the queen being on e7 is white can do your plan you talked about earlier where the pawn goes to e4 and then d4, but that feels like a far stretch of the imagination given Magnus just played the move e3. I don't expect he's going to want to play a move like e4.
Right. And I like your queen e7 move because actually black can start considering playing b5 himself. We kept talking about how Magnus could have played b5, but with the queen and bishop lined up on the b4 pawn, by playing b5 you cement that as a weakness. You stop in this track.
I love cementing weaknesses. Bury them down deep.
Yeah, and so when you go b5, you're really putting pressure on that b4 square, and maybe you can move your rook away from the a8 square, maybe try for c5. So these options do exist for black.
Yeah, and again, we don't have an engine in front of us. We don't have time to sit here and dive into the mysterious rook move. Like I said, check out the recap show, see what they think, because I don't know what else to say. But what we do have time to do is to remind you, and look at all the extra effort being made. People loving the question today. Who is going to win the Pro Chess League? I guess it's every team and the viewers. You're right. That's right. We all win with the Pro Chess League. Thank you for that. Must be great fun to compete. But honestly, team at Chessbra TV with Ho Yifan and her commentary must be ahead. I don't know that Yifan is confirmed as a participant of the Chessbra crew. Someone can go into their chat and ask them. I know that Yifan was listed as a player for them last year, but due to her busy schedule, I don't think she even competed last year. Maybe 1 week. It was
she played a couple times.
Okay, it was a long season, but overall, no. Maybe we'll just get Yifan next to us. We'll just do commentary with her, right? Maybe she should do that instead of worry about playing. So steal her from the Chessbra roster.
Hey, we'd make a pretty good Pro Chess League team. Get three of us and get somebody else.
Yeah, we're not the worst team in the league.
No, we'd be pretty good.
We know I'm underrated because I lose rating points on a regular basis. So, all right. Well, we still don't have a decision in terms of how Magnus justifies this rook e1 move, but we do have queen f6.
Interesting.
Oh, I feel like Fabiano's being too aggressive with his queen. I know that sounds like the most basic thing to say.
You think so?
But I didn't like the move queen to b4 yesterday, and it immediately proved to backfire. Queen e7 is just the natural move you can snap off in like bullet chess. And if what are you doing with the queen out here? What's your plan?
You keep the queen tied at d1. That's at least the good news for the moment.
Yeah, you self-pin the pawn too.
But the queen's going to go to g6 potentially, and then you can start lining up pressure on the d3 pawn because you can follow that up with bishop to f5.
Ah, and maybe a little rook to d8, huh?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the move, honestly, but the more I look at it, the more I think it's perfectly reasonable because if you want to play bishop e4, I can still play bishop f5, just offering the trade of bishops. So maybe bishop g2. I mean, that's the most logical looking move. You put your bishop on g2 here, you are getting your bishop out of the harm's way. You can then move your queen away and then try to play d4. But queen to g6 is one option that looks totally reasonable. This bishop can go to f5, or one of these squares are going to be very good for this bishop, and I don't exactly see white's plan because you're still preventing d4 from being particularly great. e4, but now I guess d5 is also an option. Trying to open this queen. It gets very complicated as black can put a rook on d8 and start challenging for the d file. But now it's instead of becoming a positional battle, you may see it start becoming a more tactical battle in this one. And the pawn on e4 actually can be overextended in some line. What that means is it's more difficult to defend, and if you do defend it with a pawn by playing f5, you leave behind some very weak squares, in this case a very weak diagonal.
No, great point. And I think that if the counterblow of d5 can meet e4 quickly, right? If you give black time in these sort of situations after e4, they want to put a piece on d5, cement that that's not going to happen, and keep this structure kind of headed toward the king side. That's how you get maybe long-term attacking chances. And this bishop, is not the happiest piece, kind of biting on granite there. But you make a great point that if you can meet e4 quickly, now you've broken through, you've solved your problem of your dark square bishop, and I would really love this for white. I mean, this would be This would be an ideal way to handle this transition and to justify Magnus's idea that he's now started with rook e1 and e3. But okay, Magnus has already played this move, bishop to e4, stopping queen to g6, relieving the queen's duty that you pointed out here with the queen on d1 had to guard the bishop on f3.
And my first...
And actually threatening d4.
Yeah, d4 is certainly a possibility. My first reaction is, what about bishop f5? You put your bishop on e4, what if I challenge you?
Trade down?
Well, you can trade on f5, but you also consider queen f3. And that forces the issue. g6 is impossible to protect because g4... And it doesn't win a piece.
Although there is this move.
Then I'll take on f5 the bishop and I win a pawn.
Right.
And I'm very happy about that, of course.
Makes sense.
So after queen f3, you have to take on e4 instead of g6. You just take on e4. But now I have to consider, do I take on f6 and go into this endgame? I'm not positive how safe this is for black because I can see a future where that king goes from g1 to g2 to f3 to g4 to f5. You can't kick my king out. And I'm seeing a weak pawn on f6.
I love plans like that. And these are the big picture plans you should think about as you're considering trades in your own games. Not just, oh, I don't lose material right away, it seems safe. But the fact that it is a long-term plan for your opponent means it'll always be there. Shout out to the big gift we just received there from Dancy16. Thanks so much. But the main thing here is that when you're evaluating trades in your own games, sometimes we decide, oh, I can go for this because it feels safe now. And you're right, and you may feel safe for the next 10, 15, 20 moves, but long-term plans like that, you always have to keep in the back of your mind. So, okay, I agree with you. I don't even like bishop f5, though. I feel like the best thing to do on bishop e4, you know what I want? Queen e7.
Queen e7?
Put the queen where she should have gone last move, Bobby.
And what if I go queen f3 now?
Okay, you're still not threatening d4. Because
I'm trying to go b5. I'm trying to go back to the other side of the board.
Back to the other side of the board.
Maybe
And I might try to trap your bishop here. Or
I would say f5 immediately.
f5 immediately and pin.
Yeah.
Speaking my language now.
Well, actually, I have e4. And if you go g6, I have queen g4, copying what you just did to me before.
You're barely holding on, but it's a good point because in the end of that transition, you've got the e5 weakness.
Right.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so I felt like, okay, it's instincts and it's what every Russian schoolboy knows. Don't just quickly put your queen and knights in front of pawns in those situations where you don't have clear play on that side of the board. This is like, okay, that sounds like a super abstract, vague thing to say for those who don't speak Russian schoolboy, but it is a principle because very, very often knights do much better behind pawns. Visualize a knight behind a pawn and you know how they move. You're always double attacking the same square with your knight and pawn. That's what you want to do. Your queen often does much better with something sort of shielding her, and she justifies play on that side of the board, also behind pawns, because then there's threats, there's dynamic ways to bust things open, and the queen is powerful. I instinctively was like, what? Queen f6? That just, and of course I didn't see an immediate follow-up, and I think you made a great point that the threat was queen g6, but now on bishop e4, I'm back to feeling like that queen doesn't belong there. She doesn't belong there.
And the question also becomes, well, what is white's next move? So bishop e4, you mentioned d4. And d4 is definitely a central break that Magnus is considering. So maybe rook to d8, rook a to d8. And say, I'm going to meet your d4 by taking it. And you take with the bishop. And now I'll go bishop e5.
I love that move for black.
And very importantly, I protected my bishop on d7. Right? Imagine that rook on a8. Once I take on e5, you have to take back with the rook or the queen. And I would be able to take this bishop. And the b7 pawn would fall next.
Right.
With the rook on d8, obviously I'm not threatening that bishop.
And black would be almost quickly better in a position like this. Yeah. I agree. So rook d8 makes sense. Okay, so we're agreeing that that's a potential candidate move for Fabi, but I don't think Magnus just punches d4 through. I think we go back to moves like queen c2. Queen e2 was also on the mind, but now that black would have both rooks on open files like this, I wouldn't want my queen there. I'd want my queen on c2 so that I can punch d4 through, and then have some sort of discovery on the h7 pawn. The queen c2, and then how do you respond if we're trying to predict their moves here?
So queen c2, I guess you can go bishop f5 now.
Now you can trade, okay? Now I can't play your queen f3 anymore.
Right.
Pinning the bishop and going for that endgame we talked about.
And it's sort of you mentioned earlier the Sicilian structure.
Right.
And some Sicilians you actually want your opponent to take you and double your own pawns.
Yep.
Here I don't think is one of those positions exactly because you don't get the same benefits. Often by capturing allowing yourself to get your pawns doubled.
Yeah, let's say some random move.
And takes.
Like okay.
Normally you trade a knight on that square.
Right.
And that opens up a new diagonal for the bishop, say to go from f1 to c4 and attack that long diagonal. But here
now
there's
the
no
bishop's gone.
Exactly.
To highlight that comment Robert just made again. Robert, Whiskily Wabbit. Whiskily Wabbit. Anyway. Speaking quickly, tongue twisting myself. To highlight the point Robert just kind of made offhand is instructive. Accidental teaching moments by Robert Hess happens a lot. The reason why very often you like those double pawns, another reason is that if we take everybody off without doubling the pawns, let's say we get this line, and white takes on f5. The reason why you don't want this is because now who's weak? The d3 pawn, right? And so in this transition, the bishop will at some point move, and now the biggest weakness on the board is probably the d3 pawn. It wouldn't be weak if white had left that pawn on e2, right, which is a very common Sicilian structure. So what Robert's saying is, in Sicilians particularly, whenever this pawn is pushed, it may not be obvious to you right away, but be aware that this is a backward pawn that exists in a lot of Sicilians. And so the point of what Robert just said kind of quickly offhand is the reason why you often invite this is because you do two things. You remove a weakness of your own off of an open file and a potential problem, and usually create new lines and opportunities. So I just thought that was an important thing to just highlight quickly and not leave that to the air of why that's a thing that the Sicilian normally invites. This is a Sicilian structure. Those of you who maybe just joined us, you missed the fact that earlier in the show we were highlighting that this exact type of position is basically a Sicilian, particularly like a classical dragon Sicilian kind of reversed. And so sometimes there's going to be a lot of comparisons throughout a show like that, highlighting that, which is useful if you're a Sicilian player. You're like, oh, I learned something about the Sicilian in English. Who knew, right?
And I mean, it's very common to see that, as you said. Sometimes with colors reversed, you always think, well, I play this from the white side. This position looks familiar. Are the ideas actually similar, or because I'm a tempo down or a tempo up, how does that change the dynamic?
Well, we're going to find out about that in just a few moments. Don't worry, we're not going to leave you with anything but the live position as we take this quick break. But when we get back, you're going to see that man right there with us. He is a world-renowned chess commentator and host, hosting rest day recaps at his own channel for us. And John's going to help us analyze, because he's a pretty darn strong player himself, as well as maybe hype his Minnesota Blizzard and tell us why he thinks they're going to win the 2019 Pro Chess League. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And we are back with Game 4 without a moment to spare, because joining us on the line is International Master John Bartholomew. Sorry about that, John.
You'll get it right next time.
I'm tongue-twisted today. I don't know why, but he is the official host of our recap shows right now during the entire month of November. Him and International Master Levy Rosman are bringing it to us, and he's with us here to, first and foremost, dive into the chess, because he's a very talented chess coach. In my opinion, maybe the best active chess coach in the country. John is a well-known chess commentator, and I'm sure has some things to offer about this position, as we've now seen Fabiano did play Bishop F5.
Hey guys, good to be on here. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Oh, thanks,
hello,
buddy.
Twitch chat.
Well, what do you think? Bishop F5 was played. Robin and I just got done kind of highlighting some of the dynamics of the pawn structure. What could happen here with the bishop on F5? You know, the positions of when black takes and then white takes back, and the doubled pawns, but also the fact that it removes a potential weakness on D3. Black might be spying ideas like Rook D8 now. What are your thoughts on the live position? What?
And we're talking about Queen F3 as the response.
And then we talk about Queen F3 as maybe Magnus's response. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would expect Queen F3 here. I was a little bit late to looking at this game this morning, but it doesn't look to me like Magnus has anything out of the opening. I didn't know this Bishop C5 move was playable for black. I always thought there were tactical problems with that in the opening.
Back on move 6?
Yeah. So maybe that was a good idea by Fabiano to test Magnus in a line where possibly white needs to play concretely to get anything out of this.
Interesting point. Yeah, we didn't talk much about that, so good point. And if Queen F3 is played here, what do you anticipate Fabiano might respond with? We pointed out that Bishop takes E4 might be met by Queen takes F6, because after D takes, in the long run, you've got these big weaknesses on the king side for black, and maybe some sort of potential king march into a square like F5, given that black lacks a light square bishop. So probably that's not the best idea for black.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem so easy for black to use the queen side majority in this line. So maybe he would just drop the bishop back to G6, let's say.
Instead of G6, okay, so we'll go to that.
Instead of bishop takes E4.
Okay. Bishop G6. And
that seems
what's
like
the
a
difference
reasonable
here?
move.
If queen takes F6, pawn takes, this is better for black because you have F5 coming?
Yeah, and also D3, keeping the pawn on D3, you could put a rook on D8, maybe move the dark square bishop, hammer away at that pawn.
Okay.
Yeah,
it really doesn't look like much. I mean, I know white has B5 in the air, this minority attack idea at all times, but I don't think Magnus is going to be too happy with the opening once again.
Yeah, I mean, John, of course, you've seen so many Magnus games over the years and Fabi games. Do you think that, you said Magnus didn't get anything out of the opening. It seems like both players with the white pieces have gotten pretty much nothing, no concrete advantages with the white pieces, but
almost losing with white. One of them did in game 1. Right?
Exactly. But if Queen F3 is played and we get to the end game, how do you see that favoring either player? Do you think it's good for Magnus, or that Fabi will be comfortable holding?
Yeah, I think Fabi can definitely hang. If he doesn't give Magnus the type, so let's put it this way: yesterday's game was probably the best position that a player with the white pieces has had in the entire match yet.
Yep.
When Fabi didn't play bishop d2, for instance, and could have had a grip on the queen side but didn't press. So I feel like an advantage like that, both of these players can definitely work with. But something like this, where the material distribution is so equal, there's no imbalances really. I think Fabiano, even though he's up against arguably the best endgame player of all time, it's not going to amount to much. I think Fabiano's technique to hold a position like this, if he's even worse, is more than sufficient.
We'll talk about that a little bit. Obviously, it'll give us a chance to kind of hype both your opinion on the match and the fact that you'll be bringing that to everybody on Twitch in our rest days. But what have you seen about the match so far? You talked about Fabiano missing this bishop d2 idea, and then maybe not pressing as well as he could have with the white pieces. And what analysis do you have of game 3 that you'll be bringing everybody? And what's been your overall opinion of who's played better so far?
Yeah, it's always funny in World Championship matches, because if there's a few draws to start the match, people always talk about, the draw death and see more decisive games. I've seen this joke in my YouTube channel in the comments a few times, like, oh, this game is so dramatic.
Right.
But I think there's a lot to be said about the opening nuances and the psychology and the general feeling out process. Like, you always have this in a World Championship match. From Fabiano's perspective, it seems to me like he's been a little hesitant at times. I think even in the first game, even though he was under pressure with white, there were a few moments where I thought he sort of held back a little bit.
Like the exchange sack potentially on f4.
Yeah, exactly. Or later when he was defending, not playing e5. I know he was in massive time trouble in leading up to move 40 in game 1. And then also yesterday, too, again, with the white pieces. It just didn't seem like he played as concretely as maybe normally would have. But possible capture on c5, that was the critical line I was looking at, as were a lot of other commentators. And Magnus, too, I mean, definitely the best example of him failing to pull the trigger is
Game 1.
Not playing, game 1,
Yeah.
rook g3 or queen e5. So I think both these guys are, I don't want to say nervous, but maybe not at top form yet. They're working themselves into the match still.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we see 2-3 more draws in this match.
I think you make a great point. I love that, the drawmatic comment. And I think whenever you see several peaceful results in a row, the chess classic fans start pushing the panic button, right? No, the game is dead. There's no way to win. But I agree with you. I think right now the fact that both players haven't been in top form has maybe prevented a decisive result. We certainly felt that way from Magnus in game 1. And I just said because Fabiano played a move that's surprising me.
Takes the bishop.
He takes the bishop, which I think what I can see, he takes the bishop here. Did he actually play that on the board?
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he did. Okay, he took the bishop. And that leads to the endgame we were just kind of analyzing right before we went to a break and brought you on, John. So what do you think Fabiano sees getting this position after 20 d takes e4 that to me seems like pretty forced it'll happen, that tells him he's comfortable holding this position as black?
Yeah, so really the only weakness for white, or for black rather, is the f5 square.
Right.
And white doesn't have a knight or something that they can outpost there. As you mentioned, the king might march in the long run. So maybe the fact that black doesn't have the ability to create a pass pawn on the queen side doesn't really matter so much here. So Fabiano just must judge this position as white's working with something really thin, the f5 square, if there's anything at all.
Right. So I guess while it was maybe useful and instructive to highlight that, okay, we should keep those kind of bigger picture plans in mind, like a king coming to f5, black lacks a light square bishop, you're just saying that, okay, interesting, but really that's not enough. And in fact, we've got that exact position on the board now. Maybe Robert, maybe there's also ideas where black can target the b4 pawn, but do you really want to ever play b5 just to stick that pawn on b4 if it risks like the c6 pawn being weak?
Right. I mean, well, after the queen trade, another thing that it's worth pointing out is that having the dark square bishop is a huge benefit for black, because if you don't have that bishop, white is going to go f4 and just start breaking open the king side, and that can actually be very dangerous, not just structurally, but in terms of an attack. If you put that bishop from d6 to e6, often people think that opposite color bishop is just a draw, but white would be so much better if you could push that bishop one square over, because then after f4 you start breaking open the black king side, and that would be a huge attack. So having this bishop on d6, which can go to g7 if you really need, but I would just sit at home on f8 and just leave it there to attack 4 and just sort of hang out and say, okay, if you go f4, you're also putting yourself in a situation where if I take on f4 at the right moment, your e4 pawn can fall as well.
It also leaves the e-pawns behind, right? Kind of compromises them. John, what do you think about that? I mean, I guess I've been skeptical of two things in this game. You just joined us, but earlier we were also talking about Magnus playing the move 15 rook e1 rather than the more traditional minority attack, just kind of playing b5. So mysterious rook moves for the win, apparently. So there was that, and then now Fabiano's decision to just go for this endgame feels to me like, yes, maybe you're right that there's nothing concrete, but aren't you just giving white a 2-result position from now until Kingdom Come?
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I could definitely see in the long run, if white's not careful, black may get a pass pawn on the queen side, and
okay.
It looks hard for white to change the pawn structure here, right? So that f4 move doesn't look particularly promising, especially with e4 being loose if you ever capture on f4.
Right.
White has to wait carefully whether he wants to play b5, because that could give black the possibility of a pass pawn.
Right.
So
now you're no longer... Robert and I were highlighting earlier that if b5 comes for white, there's sometimes ideas like c takes, a takes, and then black plays a5 and kind of bypasses, right? Maybe now that's more of an idea in the endgame because an a-pawn could be dangerous.
Right, get the outside past a-pawn.
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff. I mean, I think I'm anxious to see exactly what happens over the immediate next few moves if Magnus tries something risky to create winning chances or just kind of commits to the slow grind, the slow jams. whether he goes
the slow jab. Yeah.
I think that Magnus is a better endgame player, and I don't think that's offensive to say that. As you said, Magnus is arguably the best endgame player in history. And so if I have a sort of neutral endgame that could be chances for both sides, I tend to favor Magnus in these cases. That being said, I feel like Fabiano has a very comfortable position. He's shown good preparation, shown good perseverance, particularly in that first game, but also when he's had some iffy position, including Game 3, he does show that he can find the necessary resources to hold on. So I think that White is slightly better, nothing too significant, and it's still a lot of life left in the position because both players are playing on opposite sides of the board.
The more I look at it, B5 here for Black immediately just seems like a good move. I'm curious how Magnus would respond to that.
And what's your thought about that? You're thinking that B5, you're not worried about the C6 pawn becoming weak. What's a line you calculated for the fans here?
Yeah, B5, I don't think White should take it. I think if you take it, then Black takes with probably the A pawn towards the center, opens the A file, gets that nice A4 square to work with.
Okay.
So if White doesn't take it, I don't see how White's really going to get anything on the queen side. I don't think you want to advance A5 so much.
I definitely agree, John, and I would think that maybe Rook E to D1 is sort of like a useful move. Typically, you want to put Rook B to D1 towards the center, but now you're sort of questioning Black's setup. And if you move that bishop, now I've controlled the D file, and so maybe I can take on B5 and then put a rook on D7, but I'm not sure how Black makes progress with that pawn majority on the queen side. White is certainly in good shape to prevent any sort of pawn breaks because the bishop on C3 and more importantly the pawn on B4 stops any sort of pawn advances on that side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's... Okay, well, B5 has been played. We have John here, and I want to get John's analysis here because that's why we have guests here. So, John, I'm going to invite you real quick. Let's dive into the analysis here like we did with Ifan yesterday.
Definitely.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm gonna send you an invite right now to join our analysis board.
And
okay.
While he accepts, another idea that's coming to my head is Rook to B2, because Rook B2 is one of those sneaky moves saying you're not going to capture me on A4, right? If I go Rook B2, you don't want to take that pawn and leave yourself with two isolated pawns on my up on, and it gives me the option to double on either the A file or the D file.
Well, John, I've just, Jesus take the wheel here, buddy. I've given you the analysis board full control, so you are in charge of the show. You can do whatever you need to on that analysis board. So tell us the lines you're thinking about there after B5.
And just to confirm, it looked like Fabiano did play B5. Correct?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did. And in fact, we've already just seen Rook E to D1. I'll make the moves as if they come in the official feed, but if you want to make analysis here after White has indeed just gained a tempo on the bishop there.
Yeah, so nicely predicted, Robert. And probably bishop F8 makes sense. I like keeping the bishop pointed at the B4 pawn.
Okay.
I'm a little perplexed about what White should do with this pawn, whether you should keep the tension. It seems like White should keep the tension, because I think if you capture and, as I said, A takes, I like this for Black. C6, to me, doesn't look any less weak than B4.
Yeah, especially because Rook A4 is coming fast, yeah.
Right. Also, White's bishop is pretty poor. I mean,
Right.
You could argue of the two bishops, Black's is more effective on this diagonal.
I agree, definitely.
If all the rooks are swapped off, Black has no problems whatsoever. Only Black could be better there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, then actually White can play F4, and you're challenging the center, but I think that Black would be better in an endgame like that for sure.
I want to highlight something John just said right there, because again, it's offhanded but really instructive for those who are paying attention. Notice that whenever things are changing in endgames like this, strong title players like John and Robert, not including myself, quickly ask what exchanges they want, and John points out, if you just imagine all the rooks are off the board, you immediately know that Black is in great shape, because he's the only one with a positional target, whereas this bishop is stuck, and White lacks positional targets of his own. So as you make really important points offhanded, I want to make sure that people pay attention to that, because I think that's something you can apply to your own chess, always thinking what piece trades are beneficial to you or not beneficial. So, sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a very good point. You saw that yesterday, too, in Game 3, because Fabiano's inability to get anything with the rooks on board and allowing all the rooks to be swapped off, or actually initiating the swap of all the rooks there, essentially gave Magnus a free hand in the position, and it was close to dead equality as opposed to a White advantage. So it's a useful way to think about things. Just in general, if the major pieces come off the board, who's the endgame going to favor?
Okay, so back up. So if Magnus isn't going to take on B5, what do you think he should do?
So Rook ED1 was played, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
And did Fabiano?
No, he hasn't responded yet.
Hasn't responded. So let's assume bishop f8 is played as we were suggesting.
Yep.
Is rook d7 a possibility? Can I give up a4? Because if you take it, I have rook a1.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe?
So you just want to go after this pawn.
Something
But
like
I'm worried
that.
about a5 as a response.
Can I take it?
You can take it and I'll put my pawn on a3. And so we both have passed a pawns,
That would be interesting.
but mine's a little bit more advanced. You're still stuck with these double pawns in the center, which is weaker. The pawn f6 is very hard to target, and I just like the fact that my a3 pawn is so far down the board.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and this again demonstrates how this bishop is pretty useful here, despite being on f8. Bishops are long-range pieces, everyone.
Yep.
So, yeah, a5 after the capture.
Okay, so maybe rook a7.
So maybe instead of rook to d7, you should start with bishop to e1. And that opens the c file for one of your rooks. So if you go rook to d8, for example, then I can just put my rook on c1 and start attacking your pawns. And I think my immediate reaction in the position, and John Denner, you can say otherwise, is the reason why I slightly prefer white is that I feel like black's pawns are a little bit easier to attack. Because taking on a4 is a very committal decision that will leave you with some isolated pawns, and I can play rook d to c1. I can put my rook b to a1, and then start challenging you on these files.
Interesting.
And what if black does the same thing, captures on a4?
So you're gonna just do the exact. So I'll go rook.
I'm gonna use your own line against you.
Yeah.
That is just mean, honestly.
You know what? That's how you do it, right there.
Blur. Okay.
No, I think you made a great point, Robert. That especially if the structure remains, that's got to be the case. But no, this concrete line you already used against us. Now the IMs join forces against you.
Yeah, I don't like this.
Yeah,
anymore.
right.
Take that.
Because the only difference is the rook is here instead of d7, right? So
right.
I mean, target it like that. But I think the big problem for white is they can't get the bishop involved. It's just on, but black has a counter bishop doing the same thing with an even more dangerous pass pawn.
Right. Somehow this a5 move is becoming increasingly annoying. So maybe I don't start with rook to a1. Maybe I can try to rook d to c1 first. Is that a possibility? But you can just go rook c8, I guess. 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you wish you could double, right? You need to double right now, and you can't.
Right.
You could play rook c4 though as a funny way to kind of. If a5 you take, and even if a3 happens, you could then immediately go after the c pawn. There's one funny thing about that line is, okay, like if this happens, and you get here, you're not really going to go all the way to a2.
Right.
Right. Because you're going to lose that pawn. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, obviously we're sort of down the abstract line and all.
Yeah, I feel like even in this position, black can play rook a6, and it's so difficult to find a useful plan for white.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really need to be able to trade the bishops and take the a pawn, but you're not getting there nearly in time. So.
Yeah, rook c4. I'm sure there's other moves black can try, maybe a3 directly as opposed to a5 first. Yeah, I'm not seeing much here. Bishop e1 does make a lot of sense, as you were suggesting, Robert, but it's so tough to make anything of this position.
And I think actually we should probably explain to the viewers why it's so difficult to evaluate what happens when both sides get a passed a pawn, because it's very unclear. You don't see a dynamic like that very often, but we keep thinking that black is doing well because the pawn is very advanced. But I can also see a possibility where if you get this pawn to a3, black isn't making progress very easily. The rook on a1 stops that pawn's progress. White's not making progress easily either. But let's say I go rook to c1, this kind of rook c1, rook c8 stuff, and then just start bringing my king around maybe? I don't... The king f1.
King f1, okay, just centralize.
I'm not sure. I think that both sides have a tremendous amount of difficulty pushing their pawns. Because if you go rook b8, I can always go rook b1 and try to trade on that file. And it's hard for either side to move their rooks into the game with you having a passed pawn each. So and
neither side can either really increase their attacking chances against either a3 or a5, right? I mean, black lacks a plan like bishop e7 to d8 because removing it from the diagonal would immediately drop the pawn, right?
And
you're kind of both stuck.
And what I will say that I like for white in this position, I think that I like for black having the very far advanced pawn, but I think it's easier to stop black's pawn because the bishop on c3 covers a1, whereas the bishop on f8 has a bit of a harder time stopping the other a pawn.
I have a hard time imagining how we stop the run, right? King puts on his running shoes.
I just don't know what happens after that.
Well, speaking of that bishop e7 to d8 idea, so what if we try to improve this slightly for black? So let's say we take this line where you're playing rook d to c1. Let's say I play rook a6 immediately, and I'm going to double, and then this is the idea. Just try to liquidate.
Yeah, that's definitely reasonable.
John, you can draw highlights on our board anytime.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you giving them.
That's a nice idea, and it may end up being that what we're doing is prophesy or foreshadowing what could happen, and then they find all the accurate moves, and peaceful result town we have, right?
That just seems like a continuation you might see in a game like this.
Yeah.
To fully try to liquidate all the potential dangers in the position if you're black.
And it's the kind of game that if both sides have plenty of time on the clock, like nobody's going to make a blunder, and one of the reasons why we like the professional rapid, right, online chess league to make a segue there. Sometimes faster time controls lead to more exciting moments in the sense that less accurate chess but less time to come up with the best plan puts these really elite players in tough spots. So John, let's transition a little bit to the topic of the day here. I'm sure you've been following our daily question is, of course, who will win the 2019 Pro Chess League. So let me ask you, make your case for why the Minnesota Blizzard, led by you in many ways in terms of, you're kind of being the face of the team there. Of course, we know you have other strong teammates. So tell us, why will the Blizzard win the 2019 Pro Chess League season, right? Make your campaign.
Yeah, so we qualified last year via fan vote. We played in the actual qualifier, Blitz qualifier, got in the top 4 or 5, I believe, and then the fans voted us in. And we surpassed expectations last year. We started the season 3-0, and then we lost a match, and then we won our next one. So we had like a 4-1 record. Ended up making the playoffs and getting eliminated. But I would say we have a lot of hometown support. We're one of these smaller market teams. Go figure. I live in Minnesota. We're like a smaller market team.
I don't know. It's shocking the world with that one, yeah.
But we have a couple guys on our team that you guys may know. So we have Andrew Tang, Penguin GM1, who is an absolute beast at Blitz.
Well known as, it's epic Blitz and Bullet player.
Yeah, you guys have probably seen his tangles with Hikaru, Magnus, Naroditsky, all the top guys. We also have another international master here that a lot of people might not know. His name is Sean Nagel, and he's, in my opinion, very underrated. I know, Robert, you were singing his praises last year multiple times. He's absolutely clutched in some key matches for us. So he'll be back. And we kind of have a lot of support from outside players, too. That's one of the nice things about the PCL. You can have your hometown players, but you can get free agents as well. Right. So I know Andrew, with his connections to some of the young players, Andrew's 18 years old, so he's got his foot in the door with all of the young IMs and GMs around the world.
Well, and you mentioned Sean.
Some recruiting.
I'm going to say you mentioned Sean being underrated. Maybe Andrew can help get some other, talented but flying slightly under the radar, right? Because Robert made a point that, okay, St. Louis this year, if you haven't heard the news, is actually, they've already submitted an initial roster that includes Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana, like boards 1 and 2.
Just casually those two guys.
Right. I mean, so that's pretty bananas, right? And then you've got, of course, Magnus leading the Gnomes, and MVL, everybody plays. But when you look at a top-heavy team, then you look at a team like yours that did so well and made the playoffs in many ways because of the underrated lower boards. For those who don't know, you have to have the team under a certain average rating. So there's a lot of strategy, a lot of gamesmanship that goes into the manager's strategy, trying to find those sort of diamonds in the rough, right? And would you fair to say that the Blizzard's success, because you're a small market team, will make that comparison to baseball, right? Like the A's, like the other, you're going to have to find some guys surprising and turning heads out of the minor leagues to do well.
It's vintage
by
Minnesota,
necessity,
right?
We have to field balanced lineups.
Yeah,
I think out of necessity. I remember, so I was the manager of the Dallas Destiny back in the predecessor to the Pro Chess League, the U.S. Chess League.
Yep.
So I was the manager for I think 2 years, 2006, 2007-ish. And that was always our strategy. We had a ton of IMs. At that time, it was a 2,400 average.
Yep.
Can go no higher than that. So we often had an IM playing on board 1, but we tried to field balanced lineups. So that is what I've seen as bringing about the most success. Obviously, it helps to have a heavy hitter on board 1, underrated juniors. That's usually the formula. Like get a star and get somebody who's underrated, put them on board 4, and they can just surprise everyone.
And as John just mentioned, the Dallas Destiny, we now see them there. That is a full list of all the teams that have already qualified. The lineups are not officially public week to week, but those are the teams that will be in. And the Destiny are still a team. John, are you going to pick up one of those sweet limited edition backpacks, PCL back? I know you probably don't need it, but sometimes backpacks look so good that you get them
That
anyway.
does look pretty sweet, I got to say. I would love to have one of those.
All right, well, back to the chess here. bishop f8 has been played. We'll reset our analysis board to the live position just so people can see that as John maybe gives us his final thoughts here on bishop f8. Now both the analysis and the live position are the same. So any new ideas, or we're thinking that line of b takes a4 might still be the best one to go for it. And highlight for us, if you will, John, the danger for black sitting on the position, right? Robert talked about the c-pawn being weak. So the reason we're kind of predicting b takes a4 is because probably black has more risk currently if he doesn't change what's happening on the queen side, because this c6 pawn might get bullied.
Yeah, and just to draw a comparison to a line we previously analyzed, if black does sit on this position, I think Robert's plan of playing the bishop back to e1 and then shifting the rook here could be even stronger, because note that if this pawn doesn't shift off of a6, then black won't have rook a6 as a defense of c6. So, yeah, I think white's plan could be bishop here, rook here, try to double. But the fact that white constantly has to think about b takes a4, I think, is going to limit any advantage white is going to get here.
Okay. Well, John, I want to remind everybody before we let you go where they can get at you. You see his Twitter right there below his name card, at Fins0905. He's known throughout the chess community as Fins. Goes way back to his days as a legendary up-and-comer on ICC with the Fins handle. But there you go. You've got world-renowned chess coaching commentator. Head over to his Twitch channel right now and give him a follow. He'll be competing in the 2019 Pro Chess League, but most importantly, he's going to bring us full rest day recap coverage tomorrow. So if you didn't know what you were doing on a Wednesday, now you know. Make sure you watch John's show tomorrow as he breaks down Game 3 and Game 4 in great detail.
Yeah, it starts at 12 o'clock noon U.S. Central Time. That's 1800 GMT, and lasted about 2.5, 3 hours. When we're going through Games 1 and 2, you have a chance to answer any or ask any questions you would like. It's been fun, and I'm recapping the games on my YouTube channel as well. Yep. So definitely take a look at that. You can find me on Twitch/John Bartholomew, and lots of chess being played, and it's always fun to watch World Championship matches. I feel like the collective chess world just kind of stops when a World Championship match is going on.
Yep.
I feel bad for some of the other events that are going on right now.
Right, the Women's World Championship has been amazing and full of exciting chess. Nakamura busy taking names and whatever, you know what, over there at the Tata Steel Rapid and Blitz. So, anyway, yeah, no, great point. There's a lot of exciting chess going on, but everybody stops and watches Magnus and Fabiano.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks for being here. Good luck with the rest of your recap shows. Make sure fans check out John's shows, and then he'll be going off to London doing some Chessable business. We should give your shout out to Chessable. One of if anybody didn't even know what that site is, just look up Chessable right now. Pretty amazing tools, and John's a co-founder of that. We didn't even think about that. We should have, but yeah, John will be doing some Chessable biz in London, and you'll be saying hi in person. Maybe we'll get you to call in from London too.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, appreciate you mentioning that, Danny. Chessable is a chess learning platform, so there's a lot of free resources on there if you guys want to check it out.
Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Definitely do, John. Thank you for being here. We're gonna give some quick thoughts here before we go to a break, and hopefully we'll see you later on in the month. And otherwise, safe travels, and have a good show tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it, guys.
All right. Well, there's the live position that we're still waiting to see whether Fabiano's going to take on a4 in the lines that we analyzed, or whether or not he'll come up with a different approach. But I think we get worried about those queenside pawns if he doesn't. So we're going to use this opportunity to take a very quick break. Don't go anywhere. We've seen the chat and everyone busy, and we appreciate all the support. We will be back in just a few moments.
Chess.com is about playing. At any moment, there are thousands of people from around the world playing on Chess.com. So whether you're a total beginner or a grandmaster, you'll find a game quickly with someone at your level. You can play at any pace, from 1-minute bullet to 5-minute blitz to 60-minute games. Or you can play more relaxed games where you have several days to make your move. There are tournaments starting every few minutes. Or you can play against our customizable coaching computer. Chess.com is for learning. Chess isn't just about playing, it's about getting better. Chess.com puts the best training tools at your fingertips. Sharpen your game with over 50,000 tactics puzzles. Improve your strategy with training videos by top grandmasters. Get instant feedback after your games with real-time computer analysis. Regardless of where you're at now, you can take your game to the next level. Chess.com is for sharing. Join the community where you can discuss chess ideas in the forums and follow the latest chess news. Or join a club with friends and play in a league against other clubs. You can find all this in your browser at home and at work, or on the go with your phone or tablet. Signing up is free and easy. So what are you waiting for? Enjoy your game.
And a few moves have been played here in Game 4. We're going to catch up to in just a moment. International Master Danny Wrench alongside Grandmaster Robert Hess. Pro Chess League Day, Pro Chess League Hype Day here, but we'll get back to the daily question and all that is in just a few minutes. Right now, we need to dive into the chess because Magnus surprised us, Robert. If you look at the analysis board, we were in this position with John Bartholomew, and as we were predicting things like Bishop E1 to gang up that would force the issue with takes A4, Magnus probably, I guess, calculated lines similar to what we were looking at and decided, hey, that's actually not what I want. So he actually took on B5, after Fabiano took back with the A-pawn, as John said while he was here, that this looked like not the kind of thing White would want to do because it opens up the A-file and brings the A4 square. But then Magnus played king to G2, going for the long-term plan we've been kind of touting, that if Magnus goes on to win this game, Robert, I think it's fair to say that something magical happens over here for White. Yep. He manages to create a zugzwang, some sort of position where Fabiano isn't able to defend these particular weaknesses. So keep an eye on that for the rest of the game. But then Fabiano played the move rook e to d8, and Magnus declined to trade with rook d to c1. So we're getting a position that you and John kind of said that would be something Magnus wanted if he could, which is go after the c6 pawn. But the only way to do it was indeed at the risk of not allowing that a4 line, and so to do so, he's given black a clear plan to gang up on this pawn. So kind of an eye for an eye right now approach between these two players. Magnus likes the idea of hitting c6. Fabiano's going to put a rook on a4.
I like it for White, frankly.
Okay, you like it. So give us your long-term dream then. Give us the thing that makes you feel like White has long-term winning chances as we see Fabiano quickly playing the move king to g7.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think White's position is like so amazing that there's a huge advantage, but I don't see any sort of winning attempts for Black. Black is fine. Black is doing okay objectively. But for White, I see different plans. Bishop to e1, opening the c file to hit the pawn on c6. Yes, you can put your rook on a6 and rook on d6 and get a sort of passive defense. But more importantly, I think, than even this sort of attack on the c6 pawn is some sort of potential attack on the king side. And you say, attack, there are no queens on the board, what attack? But if I start bringing my king into the game, say king to f3, and I guess I can't go too far because you go rook a2. That's the really annoying thing. Is I really would like to go king g4 and then go pawn f4 and start pushing my pieces
something
forward.
Like this might be met by this.
Right, and then I want to go f4, but I'm hanging the h2 pawn, so that's not exactly ideal.
And you can't just liquidate second-rank pressure because we're probably dealing with moves like this in the end, if not the b4 pawn.
Precisely.
Okay.
So I guess this rook a2 resource, maybe I should start by putting my rook on c2.
Okay, so maybe here, something like this is what we'll see from Magnus.
And White's pawn on e4, despite being doubled, is untouchable. There's no way to attack it.
Right.
You have to put a rook on c4, but there's no magical way to get there.
Right. Speak for yourself. I believe in magic.
And if you ever play c5 for Black to try to get rid of your backward pawn, then you're left with a problem on the b5 square. In this case, it would lose the pawn immediately, but in general, it would create a pawn that you have to protect forever. And actually, rook c2 is a great multi-purpose move. You allow yourself to go bishop e1 and double on the c file, and you keep the second rank protected.
I really like that move. I would be surprised if we don't see it. I love it. Okay, so we're looking at the position right here in terms of what's actually live. You can see the boards mirror each other, but okay, so bishop e1 played by Magnus. Kind of similar, though. I mean, this also gains a tempo on c6, which indirectly prevents the rook from coming to a2, right? And if this, we may see your move.
I think that's what's going to happen. So
right?
it's going to be...
The bishop on e1 also guards f2, which indirectly kind of gives the king a little bit of a longer leash, right? He can go a little further.
It also opens up a new diagonal. If I go f4, king f3, g4, all of a sudden my bishop can come out to the h4 or g3 squares. H4 in particular looks quite nice. And again, I think if I'm going to be completely objective, I don't have the engine in front of me, but I think the engine would say slightly better for white.
Right.
But from a practical point of view, it's one where I see many ideas for white, and black's, I don't really see anything from Caruana's perspective that really gives him any sort of momentum and initiative.
But we said this might happen, and the question is, will it be enough, right? This is, you know, these World Championship matches and every game we've seen so far, with the exception of Game 1, it's a game of inches, not miles, right?
Yeah.
And as Vin Diesel would say, winning's winning.
That's true.
Inch or a mile. So,
but no one's winning.
No one's winning so far, right? And the point is, yes, you're highlighting how Magnus is the only one with plans, but is it going to be an inch or a mile, right? How much you know runway can white really get out of this?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if this rook a4 move just comes at some point soon. Not now. You don't want to lose
right.
the pawn c6.
You want to guard this pawn, but keep rook a4 available, and that's a good point, because we're highlighted this is the obvious way to quickly defend the pawn. But if you have your way as black, you don't want your heavy pieces guarding your peshki.
Right.
You know, you want counterplay.
And actually, you can just do that right away by putting rook d to c8.
Rook d to c8,
or d6, maybe rook d6. I'm not sure which.
We didn't
better.
like rook d6 because it maybe blocks the bishop.
Yeah, but the thing is, let's say you go rook c2,
okay,
and I go rook a4,
okay,
and now I go rook b to c1. I'm not actually really threatening to take on c6, because if I go h6 just for, and you take on c6, I win the b4 pawn at the end, and there's no way it's going to be fizzle out to a draw immediately after bishop takes b4.
It'd be awfully dramatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
It would be a dramatic.
An awfully dramatic exchange of pieces. Yeah. Okay.
It'd be dramatic.
Dramatic. Oh. Okay. Rook to c8 kind of does the same thing, right? As we were just highlighting with the rook coming to d6, and so Fabiano wisely taking our advice. We know he's listening closely to not getting this rook stuck, but keeping the option of rook a4 alive is what he does with this move, rook d to c8.
So maybe rook b2 makes sense here. And it's the same exact idea of protecting the second rank and threatening to double, but the difference is after rook a4, maybe I can go rook c1 to d1 and try to take an open file.
Oh, interesting.
A little more flexibility in my position.
And a way to poke and prod a little bit.
Yeah, and at some point you should go f4 for white, because yes, it means that your pawn e4 will never be protected by another pawn as he goes rook c2. He'll still go f4, I think. The point is that
but instead of rook d1.
Yeah, so he actually went rook c2 instead of rook b2.
Okay.
I guess maybe it doesn't make that much of a difference, but after rook a4,
you can't just pop here anymore, though.
Right.
Because so I don't know. I mean, I kind of liked your move because of that, but it is an inches thing here, and I think ultimately, regardless of the rook shuffle, I think you're right that if white's going to get something here, it's going to have to do with a plan over here.
Yeah, and you can go f4 right away.
And let's show that line just so people understand why Robin and I are kind of maybe anticipating this is a chance. Even if we just make a couple of, hey, I'm doing nothing moves, when white achieves this position, note that black is never happy to take here. You'd be undoubling white's pawns, and now you've really got some ugly ducklings, pawns only a mother could love.
Yep.
If you're black. And if you don't, the tension builds. I have bishop g3 coming, maybe forcing the issue. I have bishop h4 coming, which not only hits f6, but if the g file becomes something I can flip to, I have g5.
Yep.
So what we're looking at with f4 is not okay, and maybe Fabiano doesn't just sit tight in lines like that. I mean, immediately you might consider a move like h5 as a way to try to slow that down, or at least say that if you're going to get g4, you're going to have to trade off more pawns, which should increase my drawing chances.
Well, actually, I might like that for white, because if I go g4 and take with the king, my rook can swing to g2, and I need something to work with. Right?
You need something. Give me something to work with.
And if I can get the open file, at least your king feels a little bit iffy.
Yeah.
And finally, my king will get to f5, like I was talking about
so
earlier.
something again, just to kind of show something that might happen. You can even go for this, I guess. Takes and takes. And Robert's highlighting that, okay, if you give me open files, I will give you an attack, right? If you build it, they will come. That's the hope. Okay, and again, we're still... Oh, no, we're not. Rook a4 has been played, so look at us predicting the moves here, buddy.
f4 for sure.
f4 seems to be the move to play now before you put your king in front of it, right?
Right.
And of course, you know, the square, ultimately, if you could get something like king f3, king g4, and king f5, and f4, not that you wouldn't like that, but you got to be a little careful, right? I mean, the square f5 is good. If you like it, then you better put a king on it, right? But, but
that was one of your better ones.
I was just trying to think, what would I like to put there? And put the king there. You go. No, but you have to be a little bit careful, and it may not be necessary, right? I mean, we do like the square, but maybe f4 and g4 that you're saying is the more effective way to get counterplay right now.
Right, and also f4, I can put my bishop back on c3, try to attack the e5 square, because if you think about it, after f4, black is at some point probably going to have to play bishop d6. If we just stop at this position, the rook on c8 can't move. It's tied to the c6 pawn. If you ever go c5, you're going to lose the pawn on b5, which can be a big problem. If you do nothing, like I said, your pawn e5 is going to become iffy. So bishop d6 seems to be the move. Now, the good thing for black is rook d2 and rook d1 are both not possible because the b4 pawn is lost. So king f3 makes sense, and you're going to have to figure out a way to start making some progress rather than just having...
I'm still anticipating that even with potential counterplay, h5 is a move that maybe needs to be played. We want to get rid of this weakness here. And whether you play for h3 and g4 or even g4... The fact that I don't have to guard that h pawn anymore, Robert, means I could even hide the king over here if need be.
Right, but I think after h5, I'll swing rook g2. That's like my immediate response.
Rook g2. Okay. Now that you've gone far away, you're maybe giving me this counterplay.
But I'm happy to give that counterplay if I can start hitting the f6 pawn. So if you go c5...
I don't know that I'm doing it right away because I think you have this in the end.
That looks
and I don't
decent.
want that. But I was just pointing out that you left that behind. Okay, so... But okay, let me think that I... What kind of play can I get here if I'm black, knowing g4 is coming? Okay, so let me just call your bluff.
So I'll go
and just
g4.
Go for lines like g4, you take...
king.
Take with the king, and I go here.
King f5.
Okay, so you got your king on it. You
but
liked it,
now
and
you've
you put
rook
a king on
h8.
it.
Rook h8 is a really good move, because I'm really threatening bishop h4 now. But you have rook h8 to stop bishop h4, to go rook h5 check, to kick my king backwards, and so you're
in time.
Just in the nick of time. Yeah, that's...
Okay, but it looks like we have progress, not the line we're anticipating. Magnus valuing the king activity over this idea of f4, which also is interesting because f4 is not going anywhere.
Right.
Right? So you can come back to that idea as a means to make progress anytime. So
maybe your idea now, king g6, and if king g4, then you have h5 with check. Seems to make a lot of sense. So king g6 here.
Yeah, that was the first line I was giving.
Yep.
Was that king g6 would be played. Oh, and no, he didn't do it. Not yet.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like I said, objectively this should be level, and if Fabiano keeps a cool head, he'll find his way to that half point. But I just don't see any progress for black whatsoever.
Well, we don't have progress on the board just yet. I guess we do have some social activity, though. At Daniel Wrench, at GM Hess, say that is why I want players like MVL and Mamadjarov to play for the World Championship. Carlsen, Caruana play super solid chess. We will get a decisive result in this match. Don't you worry your little heart. Okay, let's not scream the death of chess yet. And there's a reason why Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen are playing for the World Championship right now.
Yep.
These are the best two players in the world, as proven by their performances over the last couple of years. So I'm not saying that I don't want everybody to be a winner, right? I'm the Oprah of letting people play in World Chess Championship. Everybody gets an opportunity. But I don't make the rules. I think it reminds me that one of our questions coming up is going to be on the potential future of a World Chess Championship format that might be a little bit more exciting. That's a daily question we'll throw out now without telling you what it is. Remember, today's daily question is different. It's why we're sporting these sexy-looking Pro Chess League polos, I might say. I think we look good.
Yep.
Yeah. That's because it's Pro Chess League Hype Day. The season kicks off on January 8th, 2019, but we're asking you for a chance to win a 3-month Diamond membership to let us know who you think is going to win the biggest team sport in chess ever, that being the Pro Chess League. And mark your calendars now.
The season begins January 8th.
All right, well, still no move yet, I believe, after king to g6. No, actually, king f3, king g6 on our analysis board is what we're anticipating, and to remind you of why. Preventing from this king, hopping to this square, because h5 check would come. So we're kind of thinking king g6 makes sense for Fabiano.
There are probably a number of moves that also are similar, but why not? What was the point of king g7 if you're not going to bring your king up to g6? Because the king on g7 isn't really much better than the king on g8, except for the fact that it protects f6, but the king on g6 is an improvement over its current a square. And I
Right.
think after king g6, again, the problem for white is you can't bring a rook to the d file. That's an open file, but rook to d1 immediately hangs the pawn on b4 because you've 2 attacks for black and currently have 2 defense, but you're gonna lose one of them. And so if rook d2 blocks the bishop, that doesn't help matters either. So
Yep.
looks like everything is okay for Fabiano in the end.
Yeah, so I'm going to pose a different idea. Maybe king of 3. Okay, I don't know the exact long-term goal yet, but I'm trying to peer into Magnus's brain and see what I can see.
Yep.
Maybe, is there a reason why I might like the king here instead of g2? Is there a long-term reason why coming to this side of the board, maybe to free up my rook from having to defend the pawn?
Yeah, it's definitely...
It's a stretch, I agree, but I'm trying to think that on your idea of f4 and g4 and all this stuff, maybe there's some outside idea of coming over here, relieve the duties of this rook on b1, so that these two guys can either get frisky on the d file or maybe over here.
I just don't think your king can make that run, because if you go to king to d3, I can even always throw in a rook a3 check. I have control.
You may even play f5 here, by the way.
Yeah, I might.
Right?
I might start trying to turn the tables on you.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but I mean, maybe is there some opportunity to play g4 and h4 and just like get some kind of expansion?
Yeah, g4, commit to this, h4. So, and that's my point. Let's say we just sit tight.
Yeah.
If we're trying to justify some idea, like I eventually get f3, I get the king here, and if I can free the rooks, I've created an opportunity to quickly flip, right?
Yeah.
So it's an outside idea, but at this point, these guys are looking for maneuvers, you know, tug of war, right? Just a little bit of an advantage there on that rope of equality.
And oftentimes that's all you need. It sounds sort of
Cliche?
well, yeah, just like reductive to say that all you need is a little bit of edge, but
All you need is love, actually. John Lennon.
Yes,
wrote that, so.
exactly. But
Yeah,
you know,
wrong again,
having the little edge can be very annoying for
Right.
the player defending. You just like right now, your rook is tied to c6 for black.
Yeah.
You oftentimes get in your own head about all the problems in your position and not
Yep.
all the good things. And so if you feel like white just has free reign and just pushing those pawns down the board, you say, "Well, I'm very passive. I want to do
Yep.
something a little more active," and
Yep.
that's when you start making mistakes. Actually,
Glad you like that Beyonce joke. Glad everybody's having fun engaging in both Twitch and Chess.com's chat. We're having fun with all of you. Here's somebody who works alongside us here at Chess.com, our social media content manager. As I have played alongside the legend Vichy64 the King and upcoming star Vidit Chess, and several other Indian stars, there can only be one team I can support, and that's the Mumbai Movers. The Mumbai Movers made it to the quarterfinals last year, for ultimately being outed by the eventual champions, the Armenia Eagles. So for those of you who followed the Pro Chess League for the last 2 years, then you know that, yeah, I agree. I mean, Vidit and Vichy on that team,
not bad.
that's a good team. and they, I think, were favored against the Eagles.
Oh,
Not
probably.
by record. The Eagles had draw odds because they had
Yeah.
a better regular season record, but I think they were favored on paper as far as the strength of the players.
Right.
So good tweet there. Yeah, the Mumbai Movers.
It's awesome to see Vichy playing in any format, any tournament, but recently we've seen him play in the Pro Chess League, we saw him play in the Olympiad,
Yep.
so he's coming back to this team format, and hopefully
Yep.
he plays again this year, which it seems like he is.
Interesting comment there from Ericadu23, and I agree, that's another potential issue with my plan. Thank you for that, Diamond member there in the Chess TV chat. If the king eventually gets here, there is like a quick shot you have to watch for
right.
c5, right? So but that's okay. That's a specific logistic. At this point, I'm giving plans of what might happen, and then we'll see if we can execute it, because there's ways to get around that. Potentially, if you get there, you could actually maybe create an opportunity for the king to come to a different square. Yep. Or maybe not. No, but it's a good point, right? And that's always what you have to balance in chess, right? You establish a goal, you see where you want to drive the car to, and then you got to get there, right? And see if it's possible. And so, good point, though. Good point. Still no move here by Fabi. Time completely even, by the way.
And they have plenty of it. There are 13 moves until the
13
second
moves to
time
make,
control.
44 minutes, indeed.
Yeah, so they're both happy with their time management. I really feel like both players will say that this position is about level, but white just has more chances. I think that is sort of where we stand on this position, and it's just trying to come up with ideas for black is not very easy in this position, whereas for white, he went king f3, we talked about f4 first, we talked about king going to g4, the pawn going to g4. Let's try to come up with a plan for black. I'm out of ideas. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I actually want to go back to ideas you mentioned that I was trying to justify my plan with the king to d3 with, which is g4, h4, h5, f4. Like, this is what you were saying earlier is full-on pawn storm. right? Never go full pawn storm.
Oh, H5 was played.
And H5 is played, and perhaps Fabiano is trying to prevent ideas like this, right? Ideas like G4 and H4, and so H5 says you're not getting G4, at least not right away, and maybe that's exactly what Magnus wanted to do, was provoke this.
Yes,
right.
It reminds me of the game yesterday.
Yeah,
when he went
provoke H5, so now the king can come back to either route. You might, I mean, am I crazy to think that's an idea?
No.
Bring the king here.
You're crazy
here,
for other
here.
reasons.
What?
You're crazy for other reasons.
Crazy for other reasons. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
But also another idea is to play G4 and have an outside H pawn, right? Like if we trade the G pawn for the H pawn, White has an outside pass pawn.
And so I'm liking it. Let's highlight that because that was a similar theme to yesterday's game. Robert's saying H4 comes in and forget the X's and O's, but if we get F3 and G4, or even just G4
right
straight up, right? So now you do something like this. We've got a passed H pawn, and that's going to help us put our king on a square we've been eyeing for some time, right? Ogling that square. That king wants it.
And there are two pluses of having a passed pawn in this case, and especially a flank pawn.
Yep.
One is that it's passed and might become a queen. The other is a great decoy.
Right.
And a good example of that is what you were just showing with H4, and if you take, which you probably shouldn't do, but just for the, if I go H5 and you go King H6, I can go King F5 and just give up my H pawn.
Yep.
Well, you might get mated if you take it, but point still stands there.
Yeah, just to make some random move, just to show. Things like this, where the king is so much more, okay, black would have rook G8,
F4.
but the point is, here we go, right? And you may forever regret your decision. In fact, you will. There'll be some sort of very quick mate, something like this.
Right. And even if you don't take that pawn, I'm going to go F4 next anyway. Because I go F4, attack the pawn E5. Your C6 pawn still requires defending. This is an incredible amount of progress for White. And I think if this were, that's not going to happen. But if something like that did happen,
that's where White
Magnus
gets
is winning
advantage.
advantage.
So I'm gonna throw a defensive resource your way that I just spotted perhaps. So what if that kind of line happens?
Yep.
And either G4 here or even after takes, at some point I have a timely C5.
Okay.
That's going to be my defensive idea.
I will gladly.
Right? Hitting E4, that's my point, everybody. Hashtag pin emote. Let it be known in the Twitch chat. There you go.
So I'm not going to take you.
So you're not going to take it because the pawn's pinned.
H5 check.
Right?
Always throw in that check.
Always check it might be mate.
And so now King F5 also is possible, where you go to C4.
Yeah, but at least counterplay.
It's not enough. If you go C4, which you can't take because your pawn was pinned to the rook, I go F4, Bishop C3 first.
I know, but I think you're underestimating the importance of freeing this rook. Now that I can't get C6, I mean, okay, I don't know, I can't just drop this rook where I want it on H8 yet, but hold on, I mean, this is even worth like a pawn sack, I think.
Yeah, Bishop C3.
Right, because now I can go here.
Ah, you tricked me.
And you're getting what? I mean,
pawn
you're getting,
takes E5.
That's why I put the bishop here and not D6, because I wanted to guard F6 so that if you do check, I can run.
Right. So I can go rook H2 here or something. I don't know.
Right.
It's becoming a bit of a mess.
I'm not disagreeing with you that White's the one playing for the win. The king just looks so delicious there for that not to be the case.
Right.
But protected past C pawn, I still have this target. I don't know. So I think it's sort of an important thing for us to note. Put in our pocket, right? Maybe keep it around to spend later. This C5 idea, that's all I'm saying.
Right.
Right?
I agree. And I think that black would be ill-advised to take on G4 if white does play this H4, G4 stuff. You want to keep it so that
Look at that crazy idea I mentioned.
King came to E2.
It's happening.
Why?
Oh, don't be so mad. Don't be so disrespectful of my idea. I have feelings here. There's 30,000 people watching this. That was so. But here, no. But it combined your idea, which is why I thought of it, because I think that now that this has been induced, he can also take his time with this stuff.
Yeah. Maybe he'll go F4 first, then King back to
play
F3.
F4, go back, and H3 and G4. I think it made sense that he induced this, and who knows where my king wants to be. But I don't care whether it's on F3 or D3 if this full idea I said comes to fruition. I want the ability to get devastatingly quick over here, right?
Yeah.
And that was something you talked about many, many moons ago.
How many moons?
About 3 moons, to be exact. Skipping the full moon, because you obviously skipped that. Exactly. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens here. And as the match plays on, we've been keeping a close eye on what we're predicting happening. Just like all of you were sitting here and wondering, what does this draw mean? Of course, there's the color differentials. Anytime you get a draw with black, you're going to get white again. But we also made a lot of pre-match predictions in regards to match simulations. So in these match simulations we did, there's the initial cap score, which is how we evaluate both these players' accuracy, sort of comparing them against themselves and to the chess gods, meaning chess engines. And we essentially predicted those odds as you would see for the final score. But as the match has gone on and results have happened, again, that's also a pre-match shot there of what we predicted potentially ahead of time. But as the match has gone on, we've gotten to a chance where I think we're starting to see that the chance of a tiebreak overall is getting obviously better. I mean, you know, Captain Obvious, the more games they draw, the chance we get a tiebreak. But what do you think when you see that?
I think that's why Carlsen's chances of winning are so high in these graphs.
Because of the rapid and blitz.
Exactly.
And for those who wonder what we did with the match simulation, it combines basically these players' ratings, their cap scores, and an algorithm to come up with, and then we run it 10,000 times.
Right.
And when we run that 10,000 times, it says these are the results we're getting by running all the data through this. And so that's why, based on the fact that we favor Magnus in rapid and blitz, so tiebreak advantage, slightly Magnus. The ratings are very close, but then they're also their history against each other, right? That +5 for Magnus is why we consider him a favorite.
And a great question considering what we're talking about.
Go for it.
It says, Karina Kruk, if the game remained as continuous draws, would you favor Magnus or Fabiano in tiebreak? Bobby has been showing some real dominance and progress in speed chess in major tournaments. Will his preparation aid him to beat Carlsen? The simple answer is no. The more complicated answer is no. Magnus Carlsen is a humongous
And then I'll say
favorite.
somewhere in the middle, the monkey's uncle answer is also no. I would say Magnus Carlsen is a huge favorite in rapid blitz. And again, that's not a... Look, Fabiano Caruana is, I believe, you know, incredibly worthy challenger of the title. I mean, he's there for a reason. But rapid and blitz is just
a different game.
It's a different game, and Fabiano has just not proven to be amongst the world's elite. I mean, we've held the Speed Chess Championship the last 2 years. You've had Nakamura and Carlsen there in the end. I think even Sergei Karyakin may have been a more potentially dangerous opponent for Magnus.
And we saw how that went.
And we saw how that went. Magnus won that match
handily.
Swiftly. Can you drop a T Swift reference? T Swiftly.
You feeling 22?
I'm feeling 22. Yeah. Feeling 32, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. I great tweet, and I think it's a good question and it was really timely because we were just talking about that. But I think if you're Fabiano's team, you don't want him to feel that way. It's not like his team of seconds, who we can now talk about openly, video public. I mean, you know, you got Alejandro Ramirez, Christian Carrilla, you got Rustam. They're not telling Fabiano, hey, dude, you can't beat Magnus in rapid and blitz, right? Because that's not a very confident thing to tell.
They're not saying that, but everyone knows.
But it's the elephant in the room, right? You're like, look, we don't really want a tiebreak, right? But at the same time, if you get there, you got to do what you got to do. So anything can happen, but overall, you know, it's a balance of trying to get your guy to push, but also not tell him, hey, if it makes rapid and blitz, you're going to lose.
And speaking of push, Black just pushed up on F5.
Are pushing. I love it.
So, okay. Now
this was the thing you suggested that might take advantage of my King E2.
Right. I don't like what White's done here. He took on F5, so I think Magnus is going to be happier with a draw than a couple moves ago.
It's getting hot in her.
Yeah, because after King takes F5, well, Black is the one who's made progress. Your King is very active. You no longer have these double pawns. What looked like a pawn storm as a possibility for White now is not so easy to make happen. Yeah, you can go F3, G4 check, but that's not really scary from Black's point of view. Just trades off some pawns. And so I think we'll move around 30.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here and say that White does still have chances of an outside passer on the H file, right? I don't know exactly how he creates that, but okay, Magnus is answering how he plans to create that. He plays F3, which just straight up threatens G4. So, I'm not saying that this is better winning chances than it may have been otherwise, but I think White is still the one playing for 2 results.
Well, to me, the winning chances have gone down, and I don't think they really exist, because even if you get this G4 check, I'll let you do it. I'll go F6, give me a check, we'll trade. You don't want to take with the F pawn. Sometimes you do to keep yourself with an outside pass pawn, but here if you take with the F pawn, I actually can even consider moving my king into E4. Looks like a scary square, but at the same time, there's bishop H6 coming, hit this pawn, rook A3, so I have a new target, and my king is very far advanced. So after take on G4, you want to take with the H pawn. I king e6, and I don't really see black having any real issues here with just 4 pawns apiece. The b4 pawn is still a target, and black's position is suddenly much more compact than it was a little while ago.
Yeah, but if you establish something like e4, you've got permanent weaknesses on the dark squares. I mean, a fantasy world says I can take advantage of that, but I hear you. We're not in the fantasy that I live in. Yeah.
This looks like a very, very, very likely. So f3 played. Both players have plenty of time for the 9 moves to reach the time control and gain more time on the clock.
Yep.
You know what I'm upset about?
Huh.
Well, I just wanted something more adventurous, right? Like,
no, I hear you.
Allowing f5 just feels like you're conceding. You know, you're just allowing.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of how we evaluated White's winning chances heading into the endgame were the fact that these were weak, and we fantasized about putting our king right there, right, and keeping it stuck.
I also want to point out that there was no risk involved. Yesterday we talked about this potential bishop sacrifice for pawns, remember?
Right.
And we talked about it with Yifan, and she said, no, it's objectively not good, but it's interesting. And,
right.
You know, maybe it could be considered. Here, all the plans we're talking about for White earlier did not require any risk.
Okay, but I'll play devil's advocate. How was he supposed to stop it? So regardless of the king coming to e2, h5 was played.
Yes.
What was the other plan?
h4, g4.
h4, g4. We talked about that, right?
Yep.
Okay, and I was highlighting the c5 idea, I guess.
Which, again, there's no risk involved. Even if black plays c5, if I go g4,
right?
And
let's say I go for this
right away.
Yeah, I think that's a key move.
So if I take on h5.
Now you put my king on the more active.
But I'm taking on c5 and your b5 pawn.
Okay.
Only White can be better here. In fact, White now is suddenly much better because you're going to be down a pawn in the near future, and if you get that pawn back, it might require king to go on an adventure.
Okay. Put a Trikaruski.
The rook to b2, c to b2.
Yeah.
And I'm winning that b pawn.
I like that b pawn, don't you?
Yep. Want it.
Want it.
And I want some more of it.
Yep. Okay. I'm not sure your
but there's no risk.
No risk. Okay, but now I can get away with this.
Sure. And I'll go rook b7. I'll play on, like, you know, your pieces are not in the best squares for black. I think we can agree on that. Because your f7 pawn is weak, your king is too far advanced. And so my main point is that even if black is still holding in these variations, White's actually retains these winning chances.
Yeah, and I agree. I wanted to keep the weaknesses on just like you did. I guess I feel like it would take more time for us to calculate. Part of me just didn't know that after h5 if there was a concrete way to get everything we wanted either.
Right, and there probably isn't. Objectively, like I said the whole time, objectively, it's probably should be a draw with best play.
Right.
But White has 0 to risk in this position. Your rooks are on perfect squares. The rook on c8 is passive. The rook on c2 is attacking that pawn. Black is sort of tied down to hitting the b4 pawn. If I can go f4, all these moves, I have options to work with. Now all of a sudden, black is just free. Anyone bishop e7 instead of f6. Okay, like, same deal. Put his king on e6 for check. King e6, I expect now. And how do you make any progress when black plays f6 next and just kind of turtles up? So I have a nice shell going on here. Nothing's happened. So I expect to draw in a few moves.
Turtle up. Is that a term you use often?
Well, I love the Ninja Turtles. So
who doesn't? Raphael for the win.
What?
What's wrong with Raphael?
What?
He's so passionate.
Are you serious?
Oh, I mean, I like Michelangelo.
So emotional. Raphael's too emotional. Donatello's where it's at.
Yeah, but he's like...
No, people hate on Donatello because think he's like nerdy. And like, you know, Leonardo's all the, oh, I'm big and strong, I have a big sword. Donatello's got, what's that stick called? Dude, I know the name of it.
It's a stick, yeah.
No, but it's not a staff, it's like a, oh, I'm drawing blanks here.
The bow.
But no, it's actually has a name.
It's called a bow. That's our producer coming through with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Dronatello, I love that.
Dronatello. Okay. All right, well, bishop e7, e4 check was played. The king comes to e6, and now the question will be f4 or g4, right? How are you going to lock it up? That's your goal, right? Lock it up tight. So you're not super happy with White's winning chance. I agree as well. It's instructive, I think, to see us analyze the differences there. But we've had a lot of questions, actually, in the chat, both chat rooms, as we discussed, like the tiebreak format and the overall format. So let's remind you again of what the format is of the 2018 World Chess Championship as we wait. The match is played over 12 games. This is the classical portion. We talked a lot about how Fabiano's team wants him to win in the classical portion, and so you need 6.5 points to do so. Players alternate colors round to round, except at games in the middle of the match. After Game 6, Magnus will get a second white in a row. So Magnus gets white in Game 6 and Game 7. So that's a turning point in the match, whereas Fabiano has the advantage of having white in Game 1 and then white in Game 12, if indeed he's in a must-win situation at the end. Time control is as you see it right there, 100 moves. 40 moves in 100 minutes, plus 50 minutes for the next 20 moves. And then time gets added throughout as the players play on and reach certain benchmarks. The players cannot draw a game before move 30, which has come up a few times in games 2 and 3 particularly. We'll see if it comes up in game 4. I don't think so. I think we're about to make. In fact, we have just surpassed move 30. So not going to happen today. We won't get into what happens in the tiebreak format because honestly, it's complicated, and we'll try to figure out the best way to present that to you in a future show. But you don't need to worry about that. All right, Bishop D2 is played.
What should Black do in response? I don't know, F6.
Well, you know what he's doing with that move. He wants to push here and maybe keep a passed pawn. And he's trying to free the idea that I can get a rook behind the pawn. Obviously, saying it right now is not as good as actually doing it because you'll always have to worry about the B pawn if you move the rook. But I think that's his idea. He wants that rook to be able to quickly swing at some point.
But your idea comes into play again. So if you go G4 and take with the F pawn, then C5 happens again.
Yeah. So how do Bishop D2? Let's say I just
F6,
go here.
Right.
G4 and take with the F pawn. The point is to keep that pawn. We have C5 and that pin emote, my favorito emote to use. I haven't used an emote in like 3 days, so I'm having emote withdrawals. Yeah. So,
we have a Donatello emote. Can we get one of those?
We should get a Donatello.
Yeah, I would love.
Maybe that's for your channel, on your own Twitch channel. We could maybe Photoshop your face on Donatello. That would be an emote
with the bow. I think it is a bow.
We already have Hess Bay. You know.
Yeah. I mean, okay, don't get me started with Ninja Turtles. I could talk about all day. I used to watch all those videos on VHS when I was a kid. Oh.
What happened here? Back to the show.
I don't know. I got like Shredder in my head now.
Yeah, Bishop D2. Bishop D2. Babby basically waits. I played F6 in our analysis. He plays Bishop D6. You know, kind of the same thing, I guess. Maybe slightly more effective in the sense that he's preventing F4 or trying to prevent F4. But I feel like F4 isn't prevented here or earlier by protection. It's prevented because of the tactic of C5.
Right.
Yeah. So if the F pawn pushes, maybe we take first. I don't know. But at some point we go here, and again we use our pin emotes proudly. So that's kind of the idea. What's your prediction now? Bishop D6?
It's going to peter out. I mean, I just don't see any winning opportunities for as soon as pawns start getting traded, it makes the life easier, especially for the side that's defending. But I don't know who's defending and who's attacking anymore because white's been pushed back.
Right.
F4 was a possibility earlier. Now, not so much because of these C5 ideas. And so I think that everything is sort of evening out.
Yep. Okay. Well, we're only a few moves away from time control now. Bishop D6 being move 33. That means that extra time is coming, going to make it even more difficult for either player to really get themselves in trouble. In blunder territory, we've been talking about the Pro Chess League, Professional Rapid Online Chess League. That's what Pro stands for. Rapid chess a little bit different than these classical matches where these guys really got to be outplayed. They're not going to be under time pressure and beating themselves. So that's the case. I don't see a lot of other options here.
Nope.
For Magnus other than the ones we've been highlighting.
Just probably resign to the draw. I just don't, like I was saying earlier, the rook on C2 and on B2, actually on B1, are both tied down in the B4 pawn.
It's an interesting point by Diamond member E. Lindauer, actually, in the Chess TV chat. He's trying to say that one thing to note is that with the bishop on D6, the C5 trick may not work because you can take it, and you can't take here because of this. Tempo, and two pieces are hanging.
But I can take on C5 back, and then I will take
So you take with which one? Right? And again, we go here, because if you take, I can go here.
I want to take with the rook on C5.
Okay. Not sure it changes the tactic.
Take on 4, C4, C.
Okay. So barely hold. Okay.
And even if I end up losing one of my two pawns, like I'm gonna hold down a pawn. It's not too difficult at that point. Not enough. Not many.
Yeah, I guess one question would be whether this dynamic is possible with these two here, but probably not anyway because
check or b4.
Check and
But check
b4
is,
and just
yes, check is strong.
okay. The transition just not a threat. But
And
thank
also,
you for the comment there.
I think it's worth pointing out that oftentimes, even if you lose a pawn on that side of the board, there aren't that many pawns remaining.
Yes, it's basically a 3 versus 2.
Yeah.
And okay, I mean there would be winning chances
Right.
there, but yeah,
Right.
even that is not the most aggressive winning chances you've ever had in your life. Yep.
So
Oh.
it's Magnus's move, and we're 33. Still have so much time.
Yep.
This game really just been going by very quickly. 2.5 hours in.
2.5 hours into the game, potentially still full of instructive moments, though, even if the game is petering out and all those who are thirsty for blood are disappointed. But I'm sure there'll be some moments here. We actually are going to have Hoi Fan joining us soon, once again, and we'll see her thoughts. Maybe not quite as much to analyze yesterday, but who knows? We said that yesterday, and then we had some things to discuss, right? So again, if you happen to miss that, youngest female grandmaster in history, women's world champion. The list goes on and on. She's at Oxford, pursuing her Rhodes Scholar studies, anyway, she's awesome.
Yeah,
and
she
we're
is.
hoping to get her thoughts on the situation and see what happened today. So, I think we're going to take a quick break right now as we sit here and wait for this game to get to time control and wait for these guys to tell us what's going to happen. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a couple minutes, and we'll see you soon. Well, that break didn't last very long because, as all of you just found out, the moment we did go to a break, we had a peaceful result occur, and Magnus just not interested at all in pushing this forward. Maybe really agrees with my partner here that allowing F5 was his last chance, and he shouldn't have done it.
And he didn't allow me to go to the bathroom, right?
We were going to take a break. We were going to take a break and hopefully have something to look at with all of you, but instead, he played Rook B to C1 and offered a draw. Because what does that mean, Robert? He's basically saying that, all right, I'm exchanging your C pawn for the B pawn, right, and Nietzsche.
Right, and another way to draw besides that exchange, if Black wants to be extra careful, you can just play King back to D7.
Right.
Because after King D7, the Rook has to go back to the B
file.
file.
And we're going to get a perpetual.
Exactly, it's repetition, right, there. No progress going to.
And not even a move 30 restriction holding them back. So. That means that we are actually, unfortunately, not going to be joined by Ifan today. Just given the timing of this game, it wasn't enough for her to get back to her home situation from school, and that's okay because we will have her again. Don't you worry about it. Hopefully, in more exciting moments. But all right, Robert, let's take a moment. We have here. It ended so quickly to give all 30,000 of the fans still with us our parting thoughts on as we head into our second rest day. No decisive results yet. All draws. 2-2 is the score. Fabiano Caruana back to the white side. Will we see another Rossalimo? That's an interesting question. And I'm going to guess no.
Yeah, I don't think we will because from both sides. I think both players do not want another Rossalimo. Magnus did not seem happy with his position in Game 3. Fabiano has struggled to get any sort of advantage really with the white pieces anyway. But I think they're going to deviate from that opening.
Yep. Well, we were given all the drama we could handle today. It was certainly dramatic, and maybe the most exciting part of the show, to be honest, was not the game, but the Pro Chess League discussion. Honestly, I mean, we had our daily question for those of you who maybe just got here, maybe missed it. Who's going to win the 2019 Pro Chess League season? Still get involved. We never got around to choosing the winner of today's Diamond membership.
Oh yeah.
Because it happened. It all happened so fast.
Summer 11.
Summer 11, right? Had me a blast, but it happened real fast. And we're going to have to stay involved with all of you on Twitter from here on out. Use the hashtag ChessTV answer our daily question and let us know who you think will win. Robert and I will probably change back into, we had to go to the laundromat. We'll put our other normal polos back on. Pro Chess League for the win, though. Get at us on Twitter. Get at us on Twitter. What else am I supposed to say right now? They disappointed us today. This was a disappointing game, and I'm with John that I don't agree with the panic button.
Yeah.
Being impressed by classical chess. This is what heavyweight World Chess Championship matches are. You know, there's even though it all happens in 12 rounds in boxing, it's 12 games in chess, and this is footwork. This is footwork going on. This is jockeying, setting up the big right hook. You know what I'm saying? That's what we're watching now, fans, and you have to appreciate what you don't have, right? So that when you get that decisive result, you really feel like you earned it. So that's the best I can sell it. I'm defending Fabiano and Magnus because they disappointed me.
Yes.
This is the face.
I feel it. The energy.
Man. The energy
seem a little
is
down
real.
right
it's
now.
It's palpable.
I'm sorry.
I want Holyfield, Taj Mahal. No, I'm kidding. So there you go. Anyway, we're going to bid you adieu and ask that you hang out with us for the rest day. Make sure you check out International Master John Bartholomew's recap show. Look for video recaps by Yasser Sarawan for our premium members. And Yerma will probably be hitting YouTube with a video here in the next half hour. So you're going to get all the content you can handle while Robin and I take the Wednesday off. And we will see you again on Thursday for Game 5.
Chess.com is about playing. At any moment, there are thousands of people from around the world playing on Chess.com. So whether you're a total beginner or a grandmaster, you'll find a game quickly with someone at your level. You can play at any pace, from 1-minute bullet to 5-minute blitz to 60-minute games. Or you can play more relaxed games where you have several days to make your move. There are tournaments starting every few minutes. Or you can play against our customizable coaching computer. Chess.com is for learning. Chess isn't just about playing, it's about getting better. Chess.com puts the best training tools at your fingertips. Sharpen your game with over 50,000 tactics puzzles. Improve your strategy with training videos by top grandmasters. Get instant feedback after your games with real-time computer analysis. Regardless of where you're at now, you can take your game to the next level. Chess.com is for sharing. Join the community where you can discuss chess ideas in the forums and follow the latest chess news. Or join a club with friends and play in a league against other clubs. You can find all this in your browser at home and at work, or on the go with your phone or tablet. Signing up is free and easy. So what are you waiting for? Enjoy your game.